In this boundless universe, there was a myth that a truly great knight should wield a sword, but this myth was completely destroyed. A legendary spear master. He went out alone against crowds of enemies, and victory was always in his pocket. He was a true hero of the continent of Igrant. In the Civil War, he showed that the strength of one can rival the strength of 1,000. He was able to single-handedly stop a bloody civil war that destroyed many cities and took thousands of lives in the Avalon Empire. This greatest spearman was named Joshua Sanders. During the war, he was a middle-aged man with silver hair and a light beard of the same color, and his eyes shone blue like the sea under the rays of the sun. And so, such a great lancer was betrayed by his former associates, one of which was a magician in white robes. He stood and watched Joshua, spitting blood at death, and said that a man was waiting for a miserable end. Lancer didn't understand, so he asked why they did it. It happened in a dark forest, at night, when the moon reached the zenith. When he asked, another traitor in a black robe said that the guy used mana better than anyone, but magic and sacred power are opposite to each other, one might say hostile. And now these two forces collided in the body of a man. And if Lancer had been an ordinary man, he would have died instantly, falling under the weight of pain. Joshua raised his head looking at them and asked again why they did it. He never needed a throne, power, or even titles. His only desire and goal was to show this world the true power of the spear and get rid of the label of bastard son of a concubine. He did everything he could to help his friend and the Emperor stop the protracted civil war in Avalon. He wanted to be a shield for the Empire and a support for his friend Caesar Ben Britain, the Emperor of Avalon. But his friend, a middle-aged man with golden hair reaching just below his shoulders and the same eyes, now standing here among these traitors, looked at him with cold, waiting for Joshua to die. He didn't want much, but why? Wondering, he spat blood again. And the magician in white at that time told him that he should understand that there are people whose very existence is a threat. The magician, in a white robe, was an Evergrande, the lord of the magic tower. He was an old man with gray hair, a mustache and a beard reaching to the collarbone, and right now he was saying that when the war was over, they had no enemies left and the Emperor's power was unlimited. He had great things to do, but the Emperor was still afraid of one variable, and that variable was him, Joshua, the great spear master. Joshua grabbed his chest, bursting with pain, and looked with anger at these people. But the Lord of the Tower did not finish. He went on to say that warriors who study mana techniques all their lives need dozens of years to learn how to use them even with a simple dagger. And Joshua was fighting with a huge spear that two people could hardly lift and at the same time perfectly manipulated mana in battle. Joshua has slain not dozens or hundreds, but thousands of enemies. Even before he became a master of mana control, he did things that would never have occurred to a simple warrior before, and it was frightening. The magician poured more money into his magic ball and feeling unbearable pain, Lancer wanted to tear out his chest and pull out this pain. The ball that the Lord of the Tower used was a magical item that turned the land of Ammon into ruins. In the direction of the man writhing in pain, a leg in armor stepped in and another voice was heard saying that he was also afraid. Just the sight of Joshua's spear inspired him with fear. Even if Joshua was not around, a man with black hair and a face full of wrinkles drove him crazy with the thought that if the greatest lancer wanted to, there would be no salvation for him. The pain became unbearable. Blood gushed from all the pores of the spearman, and the sky turned red because of the sunrise. The magician in white, bowing to him, thanked him, because if he had not been there, then they would not have been there, and the Lord of the Tower was sincerely grateful that he had such a friend. With an ugly smile, the magician said goodbye to the man and poured more mana into the ball. Lying on the ground covered in blood and unable to even lift his head, Joshua could only clench his teeth tighter in this state. The Emperor, looking with contempt at his dying friend, said that he could no longer watch his best friend die like this and turned around and went. Enraged and putting all his last strength, Joshua shouted his friend's name and said that it would not end like this. But the traitors no longer looked at him and went on grinning. On the ground under Joshua, a blue magic circle with a star in the center and Ravna runes written around the star flared up. Every rune and every line in it glowed with this mysterious light, which made it even scarier. Seeing the magic, Joshua recognized him immediately. It was the explosive magic famous during the wars, and the spell that had already reached such a state could not be stopped. Naturally, he could not be an exception either. He had only 5 minutes left on the force. Hitting the ground, he said, "Is he the greatest spear master? No, it's all nonsense." He considered himself a pathetic knight who had been betrayed by a friend and would soon die ingloriously in a nameless forest. The wind swirled around him, and his spear, lying not far from the magic circle, glowed red. Seeing the reaction of his beloved spear, the Crimson Rujar, who was called the Reaper of Battle, he began to weave along the ground to his only remaining true friend. Of course, he suspected that the spear had a hidden power. But why now? The man shouted to his body to move, because his only friend who was with him always called him. The spear was enveloped in an orange aura with glints of gold, and Joshua was only a couple of meters away from reaching it. And with the last effort, he grabbed his spear and closed his eyes from impotence. At the same time, the ground cracked under him, and flashes of light and air burst out of the cracks. The earth began to swell, more and more, and after a few seconds it swelled up to a meter and with a loud sound exploded with a column of light. and Joshua was floating, or rather already disappearing in the center of this pillar, which later turned into a ball. Joshua Sanders was the Duke of the Avalon Knight Empire, and he met a ridiculous death not worthy of an invincible spear master. In a haystack, a boy with dark blue hair woke up screaming and looking back at the stable, asked where he was. The boy was wearing a white shirt and orange shorts, one might say simple peasant clothes. Looking at his body, the boy remembered the explosion that enveloped and completely vaporized him. The realization came to his head and he ran out of the stable and saw the well. There was a bucket of water next to the well, and looking at his young reflection, Joshua was perplexed. Then, pulling himself together, he looked around. Blue roses, horses in the stable, chewing hay all the time in a wooden house. He was back in the past. Laughing, he clenched his fist. It was his second chance and of course he will take it. Now everything will be different in this life. While Joshua was clenching his hand into a fist and imagining the future with a grin, he was called. Looking back, he saw 3 soldiers in military uniforms. The typical military uniform of the Agnos family is green, made of orc skin. Not the strongest equipment, but quite strong. The very first soldier with longer brown hair of a red hue shouted at him that Josh was ordered to clean up horse manure, so what the hell he was hanging around here. Joshua frowned at them. These bastards were the soldiers of Duke Agnos, Lloyd, Gortz and their commander Rolls. Lloyd had longer brown hair, a red hue and was more fit than his friends. Gortz, on the other hand, had a darker cinnamon color and had a muscular body. Rolls, of all 3, looked the frailest. He had the same brown hair, but with a yellow tinge and it was combed back. His physique was thin. This man, Lloyd, looking at him with anger and contempt told him to answer. And then the second one, with yellow-brown hair combed back, told Lloyd that he seemed to have forgotten that the guy was mute and he would not be able to answer him. All these years, Joshua pretended to be mute because any word could be a reason for him to be beaten by these 3. Lloyd, looking around, said that he hadn't seen Lucy lately, and his friend shouted for him to be quiet because the Duke could hear him. Hers has already searched this maid if he calls her by her name so brazenly. Lucy was Joshua's mother, a beautiful, young woman with sky-blue hair and turquoise eyes. She was a servant in the house of Agnos, and one day the Duke took her by force, and from this connection he was born an unwanted bastard. Although the guy had the blood of an aristocrat, no one cared about it. The Duke's soldiers, who knew the truth, mocked him and enjoyed it. He was especially ridiculed by these Troya, Gord, a man with short brown hair, Lloyd, the one who ordered him to speak, and Rolls, a man with his hair combed back. Lloyd, smiling, asked Rolls if he missed him. Rolls elbowed him and advised Lloyd to shut up. What would he do if someone heard him? Smiling, Lloyd told him not to sweat, because there is no one here, well, except that bastard. Rummage said he was probably right. Smiling villainously, Lloyd told his friend to remember what Duchess Vanessa had told them. If they get rid of this maid and his starveling, then she will settle everything. Now was the time. It was a pity that Lucy was not here. Rolls nodded at his words, and Lloyd said that then there was no choice. They would only play with this guy. Of course, Rolls supported his friend. With anger burning inside, the guy said to himself that those who mock his mother will not get away with it. He clenched his fist and began to accumulate mana in it. Closing his eyes, he wondered if he could do it. In his previous life, he used mana in a completely different way than was customary. In the ancient ruins where the Rujar was hidden, he also took out a unique technique. This technique could even shake the heavens, and it was thanks to it that Joshua became so much stronger than the others so quickly. This secret technique was fundamentally different from the usual way of controlling mana. Instead of accumulating mana in an energy vessel inside his body and using it as needed, the technique allowed him to collect mana that was around him. In roses that bloom in the garden, in water that stands in the well, even in the air that he breathes. And with the help of technology, he accumulates with his whole body and not limited to just a vessel. Then you need to concentrate mana in the right part of the body and then a sharp release. Joshua had to learn for many years to create a mana vessel as others did. And thanks to this, he very quickly learned how to manipulate mana in the air. While Joshua was concentrating mana on his hand, Gort shouted, pushing his friends away, that he needed to beat this guy up properly, otherwise his sad face was pissing Gort off. Lloyd grinned and told his friend that he wanted to take it out on the kid for being dumped by a girl. And Gort screamed at him to shut his mouth. It's not like that at all. Lifting the stick up, Gort said that there would be no indulgences for the guy today. And then, surprised, asked that the guy was in a standing faint, or what. After all, Joshua, with his eyes closed, stood with his fists clenched. Laughing, Lloyd also looked at the guy and said that the kid really seemed to have passed out. Joshua himself was now completely focused on mana. He needed to collect at least some mana. He had been studying this for 10 years. And even with a special technique it was not easy, but, fortunately, he would not have to study a second time, because he already knows the way. Opening his eyes, he looked at the enemy and Gort even retreated from fear. When he came to himself, he shouted at the guy and shouted with a swing of his stick so that he wouldn't scare him like that. Having accumulated mana in his hand, the guy dodged the stick and hit Gort right in the solar plexus, which caused him to fall to the ground clutching his stomach. but the guy moved away, taking a fighting pose. Seeing this, Lloyd and Rolls leaned in perplexity, and Lloyd asked what it was at all. Feeling something in his core, Joshua thought with bewilderment that there was nothing there. And now he felt an unpleasant and sticky sensation from there. He had never experienced this before. At this time, Lloyd pulled his sword out of its scabbard and shouted that the guy had definitely decided to die today and approached him. In the body of a little boy. It is dangerous to fight against a man with a long sword, but if the guy manages to knock Lloyd down, then there is a chance that the thinking Rolls will not attack now. He was the most reasonable of the three of them. Concentrating once more, the guy looked at the approaching Lloyd, and crouching down, thanks to which the sword passed over him, he clenched his fist, concentrating mana there and hit Lloyd, who was confused at the last moment, right in the jaw. He flew off with a fountain of blood and crashed into the ground right in front of Rolls. Rolls nervously looked in the direction of the guy, thinking about where this kid got such strength. One more time could be called luck, but the second time it is definitely not so. Joshua, on the other hand, grimaced from the terrible pain in his arm, and he had only used a little mana, clenching his fist. The guy hoped for the ingenuity of Rolls, which allowed him to reach his rank. After all, in essence, he is weaker than Gorton Lloyd, but he still will not be able to cope with him in this state. But he shouldn't show weakness. He needs to bluff. The guy shouted to Rolls to tell everyone. Hearing the guy's voice, Rolls was shocked and asked if he could speak. But Joshua, not listening to him, approached him, saying that now anyone who dares to insult his mother, even if it is an officer of the Duke's army, Joshua swears by his name that anyone will pay. Sensing the murderous intent in the guy's gaze, Rolls recoiled and turned away and ran, shouting that the guy was a monster. And the guy himself, dying, fell unconscious. In the Duke's castle, in front of the entrance doors, there were two men and one guy about 22 years old. One of the men, with gray hair and in a dirty white jacket, told his comrades that he had heard that the mute Joshua from the stable had beaten 3 soldiers. The young red-haired janitor nodded and added that he had heard how to say that Joshua, all this time only pretended to be mute, and now he can speak. The third old man, with short gray hair and a green jacket, scratched his chin and said that the kid was 5 years younger than Mr. Pavel, beat 3 men, it's nonsense no other way. The first old man in a white jacket laughed, saying that of course it was nonsense, rumors and nothing more. The kid who couldn't even speak until yesterday, just couldn't finish off 3 soldiers with his bare hands. The second old man turned to him with concern that if it was still not nonsense, then it could affect the choice of the heir of Duke Agnos. The first old man, spreading his arms, shook his head, saying that even if it was not just rumors, he still could not defeat Mr. Pavel. A young man among them said that this was indeed the case, because Mr. Pavel already knows how to move mana. Grinning, the first old man also said that even Duke Agnos learned this only at 16, and everyone calls him a master and respects him, and his son. Pavel is only 14 and will soon turn old, so they themselves should guess what a great future he has. He can also be considered a genius, so there is no question of choosing an heir. While these three were talking, suddenly the door opened and Joshua entered. Seeing this, the first old man recoiled in surprise, and asked if Mr. Joshua had been here for a long time. Joshua, emitting a murderous aura, told him to tell the Duke that he was Joshua Agnos, had come to his call. In the Duke's study, in front of the table, sat the Duke himself, a stately man, in ducal robes, with dark blue hair and the same color, a thick beard. Next to him, not far from the table, stood the same statuesque, but already a young man of 22-25 years old with short dark blue hair, but a lighter shade than that of the Duke. And the man was also dressed in luxurious noble clothes. Rolls was kneeling next to the table with his head bowed. The Duke, holding up a pen with which he was writing something, asked if he was rolling it. Rolls raised his head in a panic and said that yes, his name is Rolls. The Duke, not paying attention to him, while reading some sheet, asked what squad he was in, and Rolls' weight pale said that he was in the 29th. The Duke turned to the man standing next to him and asked if it was in Griezmann. Chiffin, that was the name of the young man, replied that it was. The Duke beckoned with 2 fingers to Rose, telling him to give him these clothes, which were lying next to Rolls. Of course, he handed it over. Military clothing, green with gold patterns, was twisted and almost perforated. Seeing this, the Duke with a gloomy face asked Rolls what he said was done by Joshua. The young man warned Rolls to think twice before answering. If he lied, then let him not expect mercy. Startled by the threat, Rolls nodded and said it was done by Joshua. Then, with a pale face, he said that he really wasn't lying. The Duke asked Chiffin what he thought about it and he honestly replied that it was hard to believe. The Duke nodded, saying he was of the same opinion, and then asked how old Joshua was. Chiffin, with an impassive face, said that Tom was 9 years old. The Duke once again looked at the clothes and stroking his beard, said that to do this with clothes made of orc skin in 9 years, and even with bare hands, although with the help of mana, it could be possible. Chiffin's lemon-colored eyes turned to the Duke and his vertical pupils, then as a jet, narrowed even more and Chiffin apologized to the Duke, but still said that it was impossible. Chiffin, gesticulating with his hand, said that in the history of the continent, there were no children who could use mana at the age of 9. And even if we assume that such a genius has appeared, in order to use mana with his bare hands, you need to be at least at the level of a B-class knight. Based on this, Chiffin simply could not believe that these damages could have been inflicted by Mr. Joshua. Enraged, Chiffin turned to Rolls and shouted that it was more likely that these soldiers were afraid of punishment for their mockery of Mr. Joshua and therefore came up with such nonsense. Rolls shuddered in fear, recoiled, and Chiffin, with even greater fury, said that if the Duke allowed it, he would take Rolls to the soldiers and punish him as required by the regulations. Pale and even blue with fright, Rolls, with his head bowed, begged to be believed because he was telling the truth. Chiffin, putting his hand on the hilt of his sword, said, Rolls, that he dared to raise his voice in front of his lordship. Let him admit why he thought of it. Retreating in fear, Rolls swore that he had told the truth and asked to believe him. Chiffin drew his sword a little and said that Rolls didn't seem to want to repent, but the Duke ordered Chiffin to stop. Chiffin wanted to object, saying that this liar should not be left just like that, but the Duke got up from his seat and said that they would meet the hero of the story. It's time to take a walk. Surprised by this, Chiffin thought that the Duke decided to personally meet with the son of his mistress, and even Mr. Pavel, who is called a genius, did not bother with this honor. The Duke, already on his way out of the office, asked where Joshua lived, and Chiffin replied that he was in the mansion, most likely waiting in the reception room on the ground floor. Nodding to this Duke, he told Chiffin to follow him. The corridor of the Agnos mansion. There was a young guy with golden hair and blue eyes, but he suddenly stopped, and in anger shouted at the guy who was standing in the hallway. What was he doing here? The guy standing in the hallway was Joshua, and now he was enveloped in a gloomy aura. Now the guy was looking at the portrait of the current emperor, Marcus Ben Britain, a man of advanced age with combed-back blonde hair and a neat beard of the same color, felt only hatred and anger. Before his eyes appeared his friend, who betrayed him so meanly. Clenching his fists, he once again promised himself that he would take revenge on Caesar Ben Britain. Suddenly there was a voice behind him in anger, asking him how long he was going to ignore his question. The fist flew swiftly towards Joshua, but he tilted his head, caught the fist with his palm, and then filling his palm with a little mana squeezed his brother's fist. The golden-haired guy's face turned pale from the pain, but the golden-haired guy inside thought that it looked like Joshua had really killed 3 soldiers. But deciding that it was not important, he also concentrated mana in his hand and wanted to hit, but then the Duke came into the corridor and seeing this asked what was going on. The golden-haired guy jumped back, looked at his father in surprise, and Joshua also turned in surprise. The golden-haired guy, bowing his head and kneeling on one leg, said that he was greeting his lordship, and the Duke asked what was going on. Pavel said that it was a friendly greeting, and the Duke raised one eyebrow doubtfully, and then looked at Joshua standing there and he just nodded. Chiffin, surprised by the guy's behavior, thought that Joshua had gone crazy because instead of answering, he just nodded. Then he took a step towards the guy and told him to show manners in front of the Duke. Joshua turned to him and Chiffin, seeing that he was in no hurry to be polite, shouted that he did not stand like a pillar, but greeted him properly. The Duke stopped Chiffin, saying that the boy's eyes were full of hatred. The guy looked at his father with hatred and an aura of malice. But when he came to himself, he looked at the ground. Because of the portrait, he remembered Caesar's face and therefore he is filled with anger and rage. His emotions are out of control. He urgently needs to do something, because Agnos does not spare those who do not show proper respect, even if his son does not show respect. The Duke, seeing that the guy calmed down a little, called him over and said that he himself would check if he really owned mana. Hearing this, Pavel looked at Joshua in surprise, thinking about what kind of mana his father was talking about. Because this fool cleans the stables. Grinding his teeth, he could barely contain his anger. Chiffin, also surprised, asked if his lordship was sure, but the Duke just told Joshua to come over. Joshua himself was in a panic, because the Duke was a master of mana control. There were only 5 of them in the whole empire. If he notices something strange in Joshua's body, then the guy will be finished. The Duke grabbed the guy by the hand and wrapped his hand in mana and exclaimed in surprise that it was impossible. If the Duke's intuition allowed him to discover something that Joshua didn't know, then all his plans would be ruined. Looking at the Duke with concern, the young man waited for the verdict. The Duke himself raised one eyebrow in surprise, saying that he was not there. There was no mana, so the Duke let go of Joshua's hand. Pavel, grinning at such an event, thought to himself that of course there is no mana. Chiffin, smiling, told the Duke that he had told him this, but the Duke interrupted him and said that he was not talking about the mana vessel. Any living being should have mana. Both humans and magical creatures have it, but Joshua didn't have it. Chiffin, surprised by this, thought that if the guy doesn't have his mana, does he look like an undead? It was very strange. Then, putting his hand on his chin, he said that he had heard about children who were born without mana. The Duke said that this was not the case and looked at his fingers with a gloomy face and thought that there was some sticky and unpleasant clot in the place where the mana vessel should be. In general, smiling, he said that it was necessary to observe. Chiffin, realizing this, turned to the Duke, saying that if he was right, it meant that the rumors that Joshua had mana were false. If this is the case, then they should punish those who spread these rumors. The Duke said that soldiers and officers are part of their home. It is not worth being too strict, especially considering that there is not enough information yet. Chiffon, bowing, said that it would be as the Duke wished. The Duke then turned to Joshua, saying that he would stay here for the time being, and there were plenty of free rooms. Hearing this, Paul exclaimed that Joshua did not. But the Duke, without letting him finish, frowning his eyebrows, asked him with emphasis that he did not agree with him, and Pavel moderated his drinking and looking away, said that there was no way. Then the Duke turned to Chiffon, ordering him to teach Joshua the basics of knightly skill. Then he added that if the guy pulls, then let him also begin to train the mana techniques of the Scarlet Knights. Surprised by Chiffon, he asked that Joshua had no mana, how he could learn this. And the Duke turned around and folded his hands behind his back, said that they had plenty of time to check it out. It will be good if they were wrong. The Duke will return from Arcadia next year, and he will be looking forward to good results. Remembering the Duke's words, Joshua repeated them while sitting in his room. The Duke, who spends most of the year in Arcadia, the capital of Avalon, comes to his native domain to rest only from time to time. Joshua, looking at his hand, thought that it looked like the Duke had found something in him that he himself did not know about. But knowing something about yourself can be dangerous. It was clear to him that nothing was clear to him. Sighing, he got out of bed. Right now, the most important thing was to regain his strength. Clenching his fist, he thought to himself that he needed to train for this. On the night of the same day, Joshua jumped from the 5th floor by doing a somersault and landing on the roof of the 2nd, and then jumping on the ledges. He landed on the ground. Of course, he succeeded, thanks to the fact that he wrapped his feet in mana. It was getting a little easier to use mana. Maybe he could get his power back faster than he thought, although he had just thought about it. But his whole body was enveloped in pain from the inside, and the guy clutched his stomach. He felt that the clot in place of the vessel's mana began to move. Is there sacred power and magic there? No, not only that, both were suppressed by the third energy. Ruja, this must be his spear. But how did the power of his spear end up in him and start suppressing these two forces? The guy suddenly heard the guards running towards him, asking each other if they had heard anything. One claimed to have heard, and the other said that he had not heard, and having reached the place were only to Joshua. The one who claimed that there was nothing, lighting the place with a torch, said that as he said there was nothing here. The other one said it was strange, because he heard something. And the other one said he should get some sleep, but now they need to go on shift. Running through the alleys, Joshua thought that there was a chance that Ruger would help him cope with the problem, if he can take control of all three forces. At this time, a heart-rending scream was heard inside the house in the stable. Inside the house, Lucy, a blue-haired girl, was grabbed by Lloyd, Rolls, and Groth. Lucy screamed and asked why they were doing this, and Groth, drawing his sword, shouted that what she didn't understand was that they were mixed up with shit because of his son. Lucy bit Lloyd's hand and he screamed and threw her away. The girl fell, hitting her head on the floor, and Lloyd came up to her again and grabbed her by the hair and shouted that he only wanted to have fun, but Lucy leaves him no choice. Meanwhile, Groth was approaching her with a drawn sword and telling Lloyd to hold him tighter. Groth was stopped by Rolls, asking if he was sure. If Joshua finds out. Grotto discarded a friend, asked, well, so what? Rolls, have you forgotten why they're here? They came to get rid of this sucker's mom. Rolls, however, did not back down and asked him to stop, but the Grotto in a rage shouted that the Duchess had said that everything would be settled. If Rolls chickened out, then let him get out of here. Lloyd, grinning, also told Rolls to get out if he was scared, and meanwhile, Groth's sword was approaching Lucy's neck. Suddenly there was a shout telling them to stop, and everyone turned around and saw Joshua at the door. Groth laughed, saying they were waiting for him, and Lloyd said that if he had come a little later he would have seen a red picture. Rolls was in a panic and told his friends not to provoke Joshua, because he was not the one they took him for. Joshua, on the other hand, stood in a rage, clenching his fists and looking at these thugs. He promised that these three would not leave here alive. Lucy, barely opening her eyes, said the guy's name. Rolls, trembling with fear, said that they should run because the guy would kill them. Groth shouted at his friend, calling him a rag, and got up from his seat. Lloyd brandished his sword and headed towards the guy, shouting that he would send the guy to the next world. The Grotto, however, shouted that they would leave it for him. Joshua, not paying attention to these three, shouted for the one who was hiding to come out. Lloyd said that the guy was completely stunned, that he even thought of himself. But before Lloyd could finish, a body came down from the roof, asking how the guy found out about him. The person who came down from the roof was a young guy with yellow hair. When he came down, he asked how Joshua found out about him, and those three in surprise shouted the guy's name, Knight Kane. Seeing him, Joshua decided that this guy was following him. It looks like he was ordered by Chiffon. Three soldiers immediately put their fists to their hearts and greeted him, but Kane ignored them and approached the guy. Kane, looking at the guy, thought there were rumors about him. Joshua told him he had a question. With a grim face, Joshua told Kane that the soldiers were eating would harm the Duke's woman and what was the statutory punishment for this crime. Hearing this, Kane was shocked and even turned pale, and feeling the pressure, Kane clenched his fist and said that the liquidation was in place. Before Lloyd could raise his sword, Kane was already standing in front of him and cut his side, and followed him to the Grotto. He, shouting that it was not necessary, swung his sword, but Kane easily suppressed the block and then took off his head and followed him with a jerk. He went towards Rolls, who begged with raised hands to be forgiven. But Kane was impassive and almost blew this one's head off. But Joshua shouted at him to stop and Kane stopped his blade at the very last moment. Rolls begged with tears in his eyes not to be killed and Kane told Tom to shut up if he wanted to live. Joshua told Kane to stop, but he replied that he was tired of clearly saying that they should die for attacking the Duke's woman. The Scarlet Knights are one of the 3 knightly orders of the Duke, but they are considered the weakest of them, considering that this guy was ordered to keep an eye on Joshua. Then most likely Kane is still a beginner. At this time, 2 half-dead men trembling on the floor said that they were in pain. Kane took down 2 opponents in just a couple of moves, which means from the point of view of skills he is somewhere in the upper part of Class B. Joshua turned to the knight, asking if his name was Kane and the guy nodded. Then Joshua asked before he executed them. Joshua would like to know who is the knight's master. After a couple of seconds, Kane looked at the guy and said that it was Duke Agnos. Then Joshua pointed to himself and asked, then who is Joshua for him? Those eyes, full of determination, reminded Kane of him. Joshua ordered the sword to be put away, and Kane obeyed and put the sword in the scabbard. Rolls immediately fell to his knees and bumped his forehead on the floor, shouted that he was grateful to his lordship and he would do whatever he said. He is also grateful that he was given life. In a rage, Joshua, clasping his hands, shouted that he did not need the gratitude of such scum, and he did not leave alive those who tried to harm him or his people. But Rolls is a savvy guy, and he probably already understood everything. All soldiers, without exception, should know about what happened today. Everyone should know that if anyone else does something like this, he, Joshua, will personally take his life. If Rolls understands everything, then let him fail. Rolls, almost crying, got up and said that he obeyed and ran away from home. Then Joshua saw his mother lying unconscious on the ground and was about to approach when Kane asked him if he was the son of the Duke he knew. Annoyed, Joshua told him not to talk nonsense. Kane said Joshua had changed too much. The gentleman he remembered, the dumb son of the owner, the cleaner of horse shit. Smiling, Joshua continued for Kane looking at him. Kane froze and clenched his fist, told the guy that all the knights of the House of Agnos obey the orders of the Duke and when a knight turns 23, he is free to choose his own master. Kane would be 23 next year, and he wanted to trust his gut. Putting his fist to his heart and bowing his head, he said that he would be watching him all this year. If you look at things rationally, it would be safer for Kane to follow the Duke's treasure, Pavel Agnos. Smiling, Joshua said that Kane was weird. At this time, the guy heard his mother's voice and turned around and saw her looking at him with tears in her eyes and saying that he was whole. Joshua quickly jumped into his mother's arms and, crying, told her that now he would protect her. In his previous life, Joshua's youth was full of regrets. But now, there is a chance to fix everything. This time everything will be different, because he is no longer a boy from the stable of Joshua Agnos, but the greatest lancer in the history of the continent, Joshua Sanders. In the mansion of Agnos, in one of the many corridors, the Duke and Chiffin were walking. The Duke asked Chiffin that Count Revreka had come to them. Chiffin nodded and said that he had escorted him to the reception area. But this time the Count was not alone. Surprised by this, the Duke turned around, waiting for further words, and Chiffin did not disappoint, said that Miss Islin had arrived with him. Exhaling, the Duke said that it meant the Count had decided to sort everything out. Count Fonsel Zen Revreka, a handsome, young man with a calm character, dark purple hair and already lighter purple eyes. He had a habit of wearing a tuxedo, as well as glasses. He was an unexpected and unpleasant guest. Although he had a title lower than that of a duke, but his influence on the empire could not be underestimated. The daughter of the Count, Islin Zen Revreka, was a beautiful girl with blue hair the color of the sky and violet eyes the color of violets. Like Pavel, she was considered a genius in the empire. Islin reached the 2nd grade in magic at the age of 9. When children were born without mana, they were called cursed with mana, but those who are gifted with sensitivity to mana from birth are called blessed with mana. Islin was just such a child. She could sense mana even without special training. Some magicians even call it a divine treasure. The Count came with his daughter, and that can only mean one thing. The Duke sighed and said that Fonsel would bother him all day today. In response, Chiffin said that Mr. Pavel was 15 next year, and 3 years remained until he came of age. He has something to think about. The Duke frowned and said that Pavel, but without finishing his speech, he just shook his head. Chiffin, seeing this, said that there was still Mrs. Charla. Charla de Fonte was the daughter of the Duc de Fonte. She was a beauty with red hair like a wild rose. Charla, as usual, wore bright dresses, which made her even more beautiful. The Duke sighed and asked what he should do now. The 5 dukes of the empire are very influential. Madame Charla is the daughter of the House of Fonte, who received the title due to wealth. Chiffin said that he thought that Mrs. Charla from the House of Fonte would be the perfect match for the young gentleman. The Duke only said he was sorry. Chiffin, looking at the Duke's smooth back, thought to himself that Mr. Agnos was always looking for outstanding people. The Duke was one of those people who judged people only by their abilities. Suddenly the Duke stopped and Chiffin asked what was the matter. The Duke asked Chiffin what about Joshua. Surprised, Chiffin asked what the Duke was talking about and he smiled maliciously and said he would give Island to Joshua. Chiffin in shock said that the one that is blessed with mana gives to the child that is cursed by mana. Before the revival, Joshua's mother was buried on a rock north of the Duke's garden. He often went up there to visit her grave. And now he was doing the same thing, but for a different reason, climbing the rocky ledges with difficulty. He finally reached the top and sighing with fatigue, whined that it had not been so difficult for him in his previous life. In a previous life, one day, while he was visiting his mother, he accidentally opened the entrance to a secret place. But now he knew how to open the door to this place. Finding the right piece of land, Joshua bit his finger and spilled a drop of blood. In his previous life, he found Ruger behind the portal and now he intended to do the same. Blood spread on the ground and a magic circle with 3 or 4 pentagrams superimposed on each other flashed around him. After some time, a round gate opened right in front of the guy, sparkling with blue lightning and shrouded in something similar to clouds. Joshua took a step inside and came out already at the ruins of some place, which was amazing, but it seemed like these ruins were floating in the sky. In the center of the ruins towered a structure somewhat similar to a temple with 4 columns, on top of which there was a red color. Joshua, walking towards the temple, looked around at the ruins, thinking to himself why everything is so destroyed here. He even had thoughts that this was not the same temple, because in his previous life when he found this place, it was not in such a mess. It was a kilometer or a kilometer and a half to the entrance to the temple itself, and the whole way to the goal was in cracks, and in some places there were holes from which light shone. Because of this, it seemed that the ruins were floating in the sky. Entering the main entrance, he also remembered that Rigwar was standing in chains in the center of the temple on this altar, in which some kind of stick was now lying. Approaching him, he thought about what kind of iron stick it was. When he touched the polka, the radiant white light blinded him, and when everything passed and he opened his eyes, he looked around in surprise. There was nothing around him, just a white void. Shouting, "Where is he and what is this place?" He heard the answer and surprised by this, he turned around and saw a stick floating in the sky shrouded in a black aura. Jumping away from the stick, he asked who he was and looking closely, he recognized in this stick the same iron stick that lay on the altar of the temple. The stick said that it was not an iron stick, but a ruger, a demonic weapon. Joshua, hearing about the demonic, asked in surprise what it meant, because he did not know about it. In his previous life, Ruger was his loyal battle companion. Joshua could not believe that he had been a demonic weapon all this time. And in general, the guy was worried about his current appearance, Rugiara, because he looked like an ordinary stick. Joshua privately assumed that Ruger looked like this because he, too, had returned to the past. Ruger himself said that they don't have time, because right now there are 2 different forces inside the guy. The confrontation of magic and divine energy, and it is deadly. There is only one way to put them to sleep and awaken the hidden power that lies dormant inside Joshua. Joshua needs to regain his former power as soon as possible. Now he is able to reach the 4th level of spear mastery, possession of the spear, which Joshua learned in a previous life. It allowed the use of mana in combination with the art of the spear, which carried a truly destructive potential. Ignorant's strongest weapon was considered to be the sword, and in the past many people laughed at him who chose the path of the spear. After all, for them, the art of wielding a spear was just bad fun. But in a previous life, those who could fight with him on equal terms could be counted on the fingers of one hand, and everyone who laughed at his art paid for it with severe injuries. In his previous life, he had reached the 5th level of spear mastery, and this could be considered comparable to the class of swordsman knights, the so-called absolute masters. With only the 5th level of spear mastery out of 8, he was already considered the strongest knight on the continent, and the 4th level, which Ruger promised, was approximately equal to the highest category of B class. Joshua was confident that he could rise to this level again, because he had already been to this level once, but they didn't have much time. Clenching his fist, he remembered the injuries when he started controlling mana. In his current state, it was extremely difficult for him to do this. He winced at the realization of this fact, but Ruger calmed him down, saying that as long as Ruger is around, the guy will be able to rise to the right level using mana without side effects. Joshua enthusiastically asked again if this was true, and Ruger, without answering the question, told him to improve his skills. When he climbs to the top again, Ruger will be able to regain his power. Ruger promised Joshua that the latter would be able to accomplish all his plans, and then the floating stick began to disappear. Seeing this, Joshua hurriedly wanted to stop his comrade in arms, but he finally only threw it so that Joshua started training. With a new bright flash that almost blinded the guy, Joshua found himself on the ruins of the temple, and in his hand he had an iron stick, which turned out to be a Ruger. Looking around, and then looking at the stick again, he clenched his teeth thinking about his friend. Joshua swung his stick, remembering Ruger's words that he could use mana without consequences. Closing his eyes, the guy began to concentrate on the mana technique that only he knew. At first, it was necessary to absorb particles from the surrounding space, and this was the first level. Opening his eyes, Joshua was convinced that he had succeeded because blue mana was raging around him. Then the guy pushed his leg back, taking a first-level stance and started over. The first level, the concentration of money at one point in an explosive lunge that was like a shot. The aura from the spear shot towards the wall like a bullet and crashed into the last one, leaving a small crater on it. Smiling, he said to himself that this is just the beginning. As soon as he regains all his strength, he will take away everything that Kaiser Ben Britain has. A room for receiving guests. There was a piano in the corner next to the window, and several round tables were covered with a tablecloth in the hall. And above the tablecloth there were delicious dishes. There were 4 tables in the hall, and 2 of them were occupied. On one sat a red-haired girl with a large man, and on the other a blue-haired girl with a more refined and elegant man. A servant with light brown hair and a rounded mustache coughed, thereby attracting the attention of the guests, and announced that His Grace, the Duke, had arrived. The Duke, in his usual aristocratic clothes, came in with Chiffon, who was wearing a uniform attached to a knight of the Duke's family. Smiling, the Duke said that unexpected guests had arrived here. A beautiful girl of about 11 with scarlet hair, and a cute pink dress that emphasized the innocence, but at the same time the grace of the hostess. Charla de Fonte, daughter of the House of Fonte, curtsied and greeted the Duke. The Duke asked what she was doing here at such a time. And then a man with a thick beard, a square head and short dark brown hair and a broad forehead, smiling, bowed and said that Lady Charlotte insisted that they visit His Grace, the Duke, and for such self-will, Cox, a loyal servant of the House of Fonte, asked for forgiveness. The Duke nodded to him and said that he had nothing to apologize for, because even when they were both in the capital, it would not always be possible to meet, so everything turned out well. Cox was a loyal vassal and one of the key figures of the House of Fonte. Not a single financial transaction passed him by. Smiling and rubbing his hands, he said that he was pleased to hear the Duke's words. The Duke, smiling, said that if Cox feels guilty, then maybe he will invest a little in the House of Agnos. At this time, a little lady intervened, saying that his lordship was such a rude person. After all, they haven't seen each other for a long time, and he immediately hunts for their riches. Smiling, the Duke said that only now he recognizes Charla. After all, by her greeting, at first he did not even understand if it was the same Charla he had known before. Smiling, Charla said that she had heard that Pavel had already reached C-class. She was also thinking about attracting talented people to her side. The nervous Cox shouted for her mistress to stop immediately and immediately bowed to the Duke, asking for his forgiveness and saying that his mistress was still young and tactless. The Duke said that there was nothing wrong with that, because the girl behaved at her age, and then the Duke turned and noticed the Count. With a slightly pale face, he apologized to Count Fonsels and Rivrek and said that he had not noticed him. The Count was a handsome man in a light brown coat, under which was a dark brown jacket, and under it was a white apron with a green tailcoat. He was wearing round glasses, under which his wise and calm light purple eyes shone. His dark purple hair was neatly arranged in both directions. Standing next to him was his daughter, Islan Zenrivreka, a beautiful girl with blue hair and a black dress with a shade of green. She was almost the same age as Charla. Making a curtsy to Islan, she greeted the Duke. At this time, Charla exclaimed that the girl had forgotten it here. Cox quietly asked her not to do that, but Charla didn't even listen to him. Charla, smiling radiantly, asked about what she had recently heard, a rumor saying that one of the Duke's sons had beaten 3 soldiers. Cox nervously shouted for his lady to follow the words. Charla puffed out her cheeks and asked what was the matter, because she was interested. Cox also said that there is no confirmation of these rumors, and therefore, but Chiffon did not let him finish, interrupting him, saying that it was just a rumor, which surprised both Charla and Cox. Chiffon continued, saying that Mr. Joshua is too small, and moreover cursed by mana. How would he be able to cope with 3 adult soldiers? Count Rivreka, who was standing aside listening to this conversation in surprise, asked if it was true that he was cursed by mana. The Duke, looking at the Count, asked if he would look at his son, because he is one of the few 5th-class magicians in the Empire, and this means that the Count feels mana better than the Duke himself. The Duke would like the Count to take a look at Joshua. The Count, smiling, thought to himself that this was a chance to prove himself in front of the Duke and therefore agreed. At this time, Chiffon asked the Duke if he needed to make sure of Mr. Joshua's condition first. The Duke, looking at him, asked what he was talking about, and Chiffon replied that before the Duke left for the capital, he should fully make sure that Mr. Joshua was cursed with mana. This is to dispel the rumors. The Duke frowned and asked what his knight was up to, and Chiffon replied that if the Duke would allow it, he would like to arrange a sparring match between Joshua and one of his subordinates. The Duke doubtfully asked about what Chiffon wanted to arrange, a duel between a Scarlet Knight and a 9-year-old child. But Chiffon, without backing down, said that if the rumors are true, this is a great way to check everything. The knight had just the right candidate for this role. Smiling maliciously, Chiffon said that the Duke would be pleased. The next day, Knight Kane stood saluting in the reception area of Chiffon. Chiffin told him that he had received a report and asked the knight if there had been a skirmish with the soldiers. Kane, standing straight, said that everything was like that. Chiffin, frowning, said that it was his right to liquidate them on the spot in accordance with the charter, but wasn't this decision hasty? Kane, still standing, said that those soldiers wanted to harm the Duke's woman. Hearing this, Chiffin slapped the table in anger and got up from his seat and asked if it was true. How dare they attack Mistress Vanessa? When Kane heard this, he said that he was not looking at Mrs. Vanessa, but at Mrs. Lucy. Hearing Kane's words, Chiffin calmed down and sat back down, said that Mrs. Lucy was the one who. Kane nodded, said that this was the Duke's other chosen one. Disappointed in the answer, Chiffin leaned back on the table and asked if Kane had dealt with their own people for the sake of some maid. Kane also said that Lady Lucy is the one chosen by His Grace the Duke, and an attack on her is not permissible for any soldier and officer. Their actions defiled the Duke's honor. If Kane was wrong, then he was ready to be punished. Chiffin thought for a while, and waved it off, said that they would not talk about it anymore and that Kane had a new task. Kane said he was waiting for an order. Chiffin made a serious face and told the knight that he would fight Joshua today. Surprised, Kane asked in disbelief that he would fight with Mr. Joshua. Chiffin nodded and said that Kane had heard correctly. This duel would determine whether Joshua was cursed by Mana. Chiffin himself was completely sure of this, but his lordship didn't seem to think so. If everything is left like this, it will cause problems for Mr. Pavel in the future. Kane asked if Chiffin thought that Mr. Joshua could displace Mr. Pavel. Hearing this, Chiffin slammed his fist on the table and shouted that Kane was not talking nonsense. Mr. Pavel was a genius not to be found on the whole continent. Some kind of dust on the soul will not be able to prevent him. When Kane heard that Joshua was called dust, he only grinned, remembering the terrible sight of a 9-year-old boy. He looked more like a meteor crashing into the firmament. Chiffin, interrupting Kane's thoughts, said that during the duel, his task is to share a small amount of mana. The bodies of those cursed with mana begin to reject it. It is a deadly poison. If Joshua is cursed by mana, he won't last a year. Hearing about this, Kane tensed up. He knew that Chiffin faithfully served Mr. Pavel, but to say such things so openly. Chiffin, not thinking about the thoughts of his subordinate, told him to go to the training ground, and he would soon bring the Duke and his guests. Kane bowed and said he was listening. On the training ground, there was a row of training swords on the stand, and Kane took one, thinking that although there was an order from a higher officer, he told Mr. Joshua that he would be watching him and Kane was not going to harm him. At this time, Joshua himself appeared on the set, and confirmed with Kane that his name was Kane. Right. Kane just said hello, and Joshua asked if they would have sparring. Kane said the sparring was meant to test the master's abilities, as he understood it was the Duke's will. Joshua smiled, clenching his fist. It seems the Duke saw strength in him after all. He won't disappoint him. Kane put the sword back in the stand and told Joshua that he didn't have to worry. Kane wasn't going to fight at full strength. Grinning, Joshua said it was ridiculous to underestimate him. Surprised by the reaction, Kane said he wasn't underestimating. But Joshua, not listening to him, said that although Kane was allowed to choose his master, he should not forget that Joshua was also free to choose his subordinates, and it was not in his plans to trust the back of an arrogant idiot. If Kane wants to see his strength, then let him give his all. Isn't that what he's wearing a sword for? At this time, a number of people appeared behind Joshua, and the Duke, who was in front of everyone, asked these two if they had time to get acquainted. Kane bowed and greeted the Duke, but Joshua did not move. Seeing this, Chiffin thought to himself that, as he expected, this guy has no manners. But suddenly, Joshua knelt down on one knee and also greeted the Duke. The Duke, pleased with this, not like the angry Chiffin, said that he did not remember anyone teaching Joshua manners, but he was doing well. Joshua, smiling, said that he was just observant. The Duke asked if the guy had heard everything, and Joshua said that he had heard that the Duke wanted to test his skills. Chiffin took a step forward and said that Mr. Joshua was mistaken. This was not a test, but a gesture of the Duke's goodwill. They just want to check if he's cursed with mana and then cure him. Listening to all this, Joshua frowned, thinking that he seemed to have forgotten that Chiffin, a supporter of Paul. Apparently, Chiffin came up with all this to kill him. The Duke asked if they were ready, and Kane said that they would proceed on the Duke's orders. But the Duke, smiling, said that there had been a misunderstanding. Joshua's opponent would not be Kane, but Pavel. Pavel, coming out of the crowd, grinned, saying that he would help his younger brother, because who would take care of him if not his older brother? His blue eyes shone in the rays coming out of the windows, and his confident gait said everything for the owner. Pavel was wearing a gray shirt, and under it a dark gray jacket, and a purple tailcoat decorated his neck. The guy had a sword on his belt, and his trousers were white. The Duke, looking down at the two sons, said that this was just a practice match, so they should only use wooden swords. Pavel, taking a wooden sword from the stand, brought it to Joshua for training, saying that of course he would use a training sword because he was not going to fight at full strength. Joshua, smiling, thought that Chiffin and Pavel had staged a whole show here in order to finish him off, so he had to show them what a real show was. Grinning devilishly, Joshua also went to the stand, but unlike his brother, he took a mop and broke its end, making a simple stick out of it. These actions of his certainly surprised Duke and Chiffon, but Joshua didn't care. He raised his stick and proudly said that this would be enough for him. Charla, the red-haired Fonty, seeing this, laughed, saying that the guy was funny, and the eternally nervous Coke told her not to talk like that. Chiffon, taking a step, said that it was not a joke that Joshua was going to do with just a stick. But the Duke stopped him with his hand and asked the boy, who turned to the voice, that he seriously intended to fight with this. Of course, Joshua said that he was more serious than ever, seeing the confidence in his son's eyes. The Duke nodded and looked at Chiffon and the guests, told them to sit down and get ready to watch the duel. After Chiffon bowed and began to lead the guests, the Duke turned towards Pavel and warned him not to use mana. The smug Pavel, who had already assumed a pose, said that the Duke should not worry, but thought to himself that it was a pity to waste mana on this renegade. Kane was also among the observers, and the fact that his future master took a stick did not make him very happy, but on the contrary, made him nervous. He wondered what his master was up to. Grinning, Pavel mockingly told Joshua that in vain he thought to repel him by hitting him with some kind of stick, although it was Joshua's stick. Smiling nastily, Pavel continued, saying that the stick is very similar to the mop with which Joshua needed shit in the stable. Joshua, without commenting on his brother's words in any way, just assumed a pose with a stick, as if he had a spear in his hands. The Duke shouted for them to start the duel and Pavel immediately went towards Joshua with a jerk, but when he raised his head, the end of the stick was waiting for him. At the last moment, Pavel managed to turn away from the blow with the stick and without getting lost, he immediately prepared to make a horizontal swing with the sword, at the same time provoking Joshua. Because if he learned to hold a stick somewhere, it does not mean that it will work. Joshua, watching his brother's movement, thought to himself that Pavel was B-class and although he was fast, he was very predictable. Before Pavel managed to make a swing from the left side, Joshua managed to hit him from the right side and the side, but Led again at the last moment managed to put a block with his hand. But of course his loss in the first round angered Pavel and he angrily raised his sword, shouting that Joshua was a plebeian nobody and he would not be able to defeat him. But again, I got a shelf in my stomach without having time to make a swing. Pavel grabbed a stick by his stomach with one hand, trembling all over and saying that he could not lose to such trash as Joshua. Joshua, seeing his brother's persistence, thought to himself that he was holding up well, in that case he would keep his distance. But his thoughts were interrupted when he saw how Pavel's wooden sword glowed blue and was rapidly approaching the guy. Seeing this, the Duke immediately thought that mana at such a distance was very dangerous and shouted for Pavel to stop, but there was already an explosion from the collision of the mana of both participants. Due to the explosion, dust and blinding light rose. But when they subsided, the Duke saw that Pavel's sword had broken off, but Joshua's stick was swirling with a fading dense, dark blue mana. Count Revreka, who was watching like the others, exclaimed in surprise that it was mana. Surprised, Pavel, with a destroyed sword, clenched his teeth and looked at Joshua and could not believe that this pitiful creature had mana. Pavel remembered his father's words that he would return next year and wait for the results from Joshua. And not believing that his brother could take his place in a rage, he threw away the wooden broken sword and pulling out his sword, filled it with mana, shouting that he was not the rightful heir of the duchy. Joshua, looking at this, thought with tension that even though the duchy would fall in 10 years, but it could become, for him, Joshua, solid ground under his feet and help him achieve his goals in the future. As a poet, he filled a stick with his thick mana with the idea that he should devour Paul. The two mana-filled weapons were on their way to clash, but a shout filled with the Duke's power and aura stopped them both. Not only Joshua and Pavel, but also Charla, covered her ears from unbearable pain. The Duke, with a gloomy face, said that if these two continued, he would not spare them. Of course, the sons heeded the will of their father. Chiffon, in turn, trembled with indignation and irritation. Gritting his teeth, he couldn't believe Joshua had mana at 9 years old. This is the first time in history to happen in the world. The Duke turned to Chiffon and asked if this duel was enough. When he came to, Chiffon said that he had never seen such a mana, but at the same time Count Revreka said that he thought it was mana. The Count looked down doubtfully and said that although Mr. Joshua had less mana than Mr. Pavel, its structure was strikingly different from everything the Count had seen. What was particularly remarkable was the way she concentrated. Charla was surprised to say that it looks like Joshua really owns mana, but Kane was surprised by the strength of his future master. Smiling, the Duke praised Joshua for having mana at the age of 9. This surprised the Duke and he did not pay attention at all to the angry Pavel, who was standing at a distance. Chiffon wanted to object again, but the Duke, with an overwhelming aura, ordered him to calm down. Sweating Chiffon bowed his head and said that he was obeying his lordship. The Duke then turned to Joshua, saying that he was waiting for him in his chambers that evening. This, of course, surprised Chiffon and Pavel very much. Especially Pavel was very angry because his father never let him into his chambers. Joshua, seeing his brother's attempts, clenched his fist and smiled and said that he would be glad to meet the Duke. In the guest room of the Duke's mansion, Charla was now there, smiling and jumping on the bed, telling Cox that it was cool. The nervous Coke calmed his mistress as best he could, but the girl was incredibly happy. She clenched her fists with joy and said that it was amazing that Joshua owned mana at his age. It could even be considered a historical moment. Then, clapping her hands, she said that she had made up her mind. Surprised, Cox asked her what she had decided on, and she said that of course she was a little embarrassed that Joshua was an illegitimate child, but she would still make him her own. In the Duke's residence, in the Duchess's room, the Duchess in anger slapped Chiffon, who was sitting on one knee. Duchess Vanessa von Agnos was the sister of the Emperor and the wife of Duke Agnos. She, like Pavel, had golden hair and blue eyes, and now she was angry. After the slap, she asked Chiffon again what happened to Pavel. Chiffon, looking at the floor, said that Mr. Pavel had lost to Joshua, because of which the Duchess's anger rose to heaven again, and the Duchess, unable to stand it, gave another slap to Chiffon. Trembling with anger, the Duchess did not believe what Chiffon said. How could this little bastard use mana and even beat Pavel? How is this even possible? Somehow restraining herself, the Duchess folded her arms on her chest and looked at Chiffon, asked what the Duke had said. Chiffon, not daring to raise his head, reported that the Duke would most likely take the guy to the capital. Chiffon thought that after the Duke personally saw the guy's abilities, he personally wanted to observe his growth. Therefore, Chiffon thought that it could not be left like this, because problems could begin. The Duchess, in response, told him that if he had done his job better, then this would not have happened at all. Chiffon asked Ms. Vanessa not to worry, because he knew how to fix the situation. Vanessa looked at him expectantly, and Chiffon said that although it was just his guess, he thought that the Duke wanted to announce to the whole empire that Joshua's mana had reached B rank. The Duchess snorted at his guesses, and told him to stop talking nonsense. But Chiffon did not want to give up and reported that 2 counts were also watching the duel. Even if they assume that they didn't see mana in that fight, then Joshua will definitely be tested. The Duchess asked curiously what kind of test it was, and the knight replied that in their empire, in order to be recognized as a B-class knight, he must fight a knight from the order of the imperial family. And of course there is also to demonstrate mana. Hearing this, the Duchess was delighted, not believing in such luck. After all, her uncles were connected with the knightly order of the monastic family, and it looks like she will have to contact him. Meanwhile, evening came and Joshua knocked on the Duke's door, at the same time saying that it was him. From the other side of the door, a voice was heard telling him to come in, and he opened the door and went in and saw the Duke standing near his desk. Joshua dropped to one knee and greeted his father. The Duke, coldly looking at him, said to introduce himself. Joshua hesitated for a second, but then he raised his head and said that he was Joshua von Agnos. The Duke, seeing this confidence of his son, said that he had changed a lot during the time they had not seen each other. Joshua just said it's been a long time. Then the Duke closed his eyes and asked the guy if he hated him. Joshua, denying it, said that the Duke had important business in the imperial palace, so he did not count on much. But still, the guy had a request to the Duke. The Duke asked him what his request was, but without giving him an answer, he himself asked if he wanted an apology. Joshua immediately rejected it, and thought to himself that apologies in the cruel world of natural selection are worthless, and he said out loud that the request was related to their train to the capital. The Duke, looking at him condescendingly, asked if he thought the Duke would take him. Joshua answered yes without a second's hesitation, and the Duke asked why he thought so. The first reason was that, before the appearance of Joshua, Pavel was considered the undisputed heir of the Duke, but after what happened, it is necessary to prevent unrest in the family, and therefore it is better not to leave him here. Smiling contentedly, the Duke thought that his son was not only fighting well. If he had known about it earlier, he would have adopted him. Joshua continued, saying that the second reason is the greed of the Duke himself and the latter's unwillingness to let the guy go. After all, if he can climb to the top and surpass the Duke, then the Duchy of Agnos can soar on everyone. So soar that he won't even have to reckon with the imperial family. The Duke said with displeasure that Joshua's words sounded as if he had all the data for this. Joshua, on the other hand, said that he at least has the strength that will not disappoint the Duke. The Duke was extremely pleased and considered Joshua a masterpiece. The guy stood in front of him and wasn't a bit afraid. The Duke asked Joshua if he had any idea what the Duke would do with him. Joshua, standing straight, said that he would be sent to the academy, which is located in the capital, in the Avalon Empire. The children of aristocrats must study at the academy from the age of 10 to 16. Students with outstanding talent may graduate earlier. The imperial family created this system in order to keep the children in the academy as hostages and thereby control the aristocrats while maintaining their loyalty to the imperial family. And if outstanding talents appear, then attract them to your side. The Duke said that Joshua was right. He would take the guy to the capital. So they will be around and he, the Duke, can teach him. There are only 5 masters in the empire, including Agnos, and it's an incredible chance to get from him, but Joshua still refused. Not understanding the reason for the refusal, the Duke asked why, and Joshua replied that even though the Duke is a real master of the sword, but Joshua himself wants to use a spear. Hearing his son's words, the Duke immediately became enraged, thinking to himself that in sparring it looks like the guy did not just use a pathetic stick, emitting a huge amount of money directed towards Joshua. He said that he did not understand the guy. Why did he want to use a spear? feeling the pressure of this rough but very strong mana. Joshua could hardly stand, thinking to himself that the Duke was devoted to the sword, but he was boundlessly loyal to the spear. Joshua, looking firmly in the Duke's direction, said that he would sweep away with his spear anyone who stood in his way, even if it was the Duke himself, who is one of the 9 stars. Upon hearing this, the frowning Duke said that since he had so much honor, he should show what his spear was worth. Joshua, incredulous, asked what he meant by sparring with the Duke himself, and the Duke nodded, saying that he would check it out himself. Smiling, Joshua thought to himself that Agnos is one of the 9 stars. There will be no such chance anymore. The Duke asked him if he agreed, and Joshua replied that he agreed, but with one condition. If Joshua passes the test, then the Duke must agree to his request. Smiling, the Duke agreed to this condition and added his own. If Joshua does not pass, then he will obey his orders. After hearing this, the guy immediately realized that his father, in case of victory, wanted to force him to change his spear for a sword, but still agreed because he was not going to hide his skills. At this time, somewhere and at someone conjured over the ball until a face appeared there. Next to the magician, the woman took off her hood and Duchess Agnos was already looking into the ball after greeting her uncle. There was a man with blonde hair and a light beard in the ball, and he greeted the Duchess in the same way, asking about her well-being and about the Duke. The Duchess, she said that the Duke seemed to have things to do, but she had a request for her uncle. Joshua left the Duke's room and looked back in his direction once more, thinking about the power that the Duke had shown. That's the power of the master. The guy's body was still shaking. While he was thinking about his own, Pavel suddenly called him, who was standing to his left. Turning around, he looked at Pavel, who said that they needed to talk. Joshua immediately turned around, saying that he had nothing to talk about with him, but Pavel shouted at him to freeze in place. In anger and rage, Pavel shouted at him to fight again. Joshua looked at his brother's clear gaze, despite his anger and rage, and said to himself that Pavel's gaze had changed. Now he was burning with passion and a desire to never lose. He had a desire to win. Smiling, Joshua asked Pavel if he was sure for his words. At this time, in the majestic imperial palace, a man with golden hair combed back and a beard of the same color sat on the throne. He was laughing loudly after the words of the man with green hair who was bowing to him. He asked if it was right. It is true that Agnos' family has a child again who can become a star. This man with golden eyes and royal black outfits was the emperor himself, Marcus Ben Britain. A man with green hair and the same eye color said that it was. The emperor asked him that Vanessa was hiding this child, but the man, who seemed to be a knight, said that the child was not Vanessa's son. Surprised, the emperor asked if the boy was a bastard, and the knight said that he was the servant's son. Finding this interesting, the emperor got up from his seat, walking back and forth. From the boiling blood, he said that even Pavel is a real treasure for the empire, and now another such genius has appeared, and both of them were from the Agnos family. The emperor even envied Duke Agnos. The green-haired knight said that the princes were geniuses too, but the emperor denied it. Yes, some were able to inherit his strength, but they are still too weak. Although the emperor underestimated the abilities of the princes, but they were really talented. The emperor himself has enough power to be a master, and because of this underestimates others. For the same reason, the emperor was eagerly looking for talents. Stroking his beard, the emperor said that since the Duke had stopped hiding his second son, it meant that his strength was at least comparable to that of Paul. The green-haired one said that there are rumors that Pavel lost to this guy. The emperor, surprised, asked how Paul could lose, the older guy. Bowing his head, the green-haired man said that the boy was 9. A 9-year-old boy brought the main genius of the empire to his knees. After thinking about it, the emperor laughed loudly, saying that it was very, very interesting. The green-haired one also reported that Duke Agnos was most likely to request a sparring match with a knight from the imperial order, and roughly speaking, the green-haired one believed that this guy was almost at the C-class level. Smiling, the emperor rejoiced at his find. After all, at just 9 years old, he did such a thing. It intrigued him very much. Hearing his words, the green-haired man doubtfully thought that it looked like the emperor himself wanted to make sure of the strength of this boy. The emperor was an empire and the consequences of his actions were devastating. He asked the emperor himself about it, but he only sighed in frustration, saying that he would like to, but the wolves are just waiting for the right moment, so, unfortunately, he will not succeed. But still, the emperor ordered to send one of the princes, because to understand talents is one of the qualities that an emperor should possess. When the table is set, everyone should have time to eat as much as they can. At that time, Joshua and Pavel's fight started, and Joshua jumped with concentrated mana in his fists towards Pavel. The latter took out his sword and put a block, but recoiled back from the recoil of the blow, and his hand was cut on the tip of his own sword. Pavel couldn't believe the mana in his bare fist had such power. Joshua, getting up, said that Pavlov's face showed what he was thinking. Joshua forced Paul to see how strong hand-to-hand combat, which Paul so disrespected, could be. Startled, Pavel shouted to Joshua not to mock him. After filling his sword with mana, he swung his sword towards Joshua, and Joshua again filled his hands with a thick dark blue aura hit the blade, shouting aura explosion. The explosion threw Pavel far away. Pavel wondered how Joshua was able to transfer mana to one point. He didn't want to admit it, but he couldn't help but admit that Joshua was much stronger than him. A shadow covered him, and he heard a voice asking him if he was offended. Pavel, trembling, shouted his brother's name, and Joshua himself, looking at him coldly, told him to become stronger. But I did not forget this feeling of defeat. Pavel lost to an unarmed man whom he underestimated. Joshua wanted to tear Paul to pieces because he insulted him and his mother, but he spared him for the pure love of rivalry. But Joshua promised that if Paul did not correct his behavior, he would make sure that Paul could not use his hands. Trembling all over, Pavel looked at the mad face of his brother. When leaving, Joshua told him not to forget about their difference in strength, and these were the last words that cut into the pride of the young guy and made him shed tears. The next day in the Duchy of Agnos, in Joshua's room, the guy suffered from using too much mana. Although it became easier to control mana due to the fact that he absorbed Ruger, but the residual pain did not go away. Clenching his puny fist, he thought it was because his body wasn't trained yet. Suddenly there was a knock on his white door, and the guy thought that Cain had come. But when he opened the door, he saw a red-haired girl who immediately asked the guy that he was Joshua von Agnos. The guy, without answering, asked in reply who she was, and a beautiful girl with red hair and beautiful eyes of the same color said that her name was Charla de Fonte. She asked if he would mind if she addressed him as you, yet he was 3 years younger than her. Coming into the room, Charlie said that Joshua could call her sister. The guy himself is dissatisfied and frowned. But even without seeing it, the girl continued, asking him to chat not on the threshold, because she has a lot of questions. But Joshua did not let Charlie go into the room and blocked her way with his hand, which surprised the girl very much, and then he whispered in her ear to get out and slammed the door in front of her. Then it completely shocked her, talking about some kind of game happening. Early in the morning, Joshua was walking to his bed when there was another knock on the door. Turning angrily, he opened the door and growled at her to get out, but saw Cain there, who, frightened, said that since he was out of sorts, Cain would come to Joshua later. Joshua said that he thought it wasn't Cain and therefore asked for forgiveness, asked the knight if he had done what the guy asked. Cain said that he finished everything as Joshua asked, but he didn't understand why the guy did it. Smiling, Joshua said that Cain should just believe in him and follow him, with a winner's smile. Then Cain will understand everything. A world of myriad spider nests. It is a small secret world under the control of the Liju Federation. It consists of 7 large urban bases, each of which is a kind of root of the human race. Balin is one of the largest cities in this world. The prices for land here are simply cosmic. However, in the very center of this city there is a private villa surrounded by huge mountains and rivers. At that time, the residence of the caretaker of the city, looking at his reflection in the mirror, he notices that even if more than 10 years have passed, he is still too attractive. Baijian is the grandson of the Balin city caretaker. Standing at the mirror in the bathtub, he notices that he still can't get used to this reflection in the mirror. In fact, Baijai is a time traveler. In his previous life, he was a soldier who died on a mission. Then I came to this world with all these spiritual animals and their owners. Not that Baijai thought he was traveling in time. He thinks it's more like some kind of reincarnation. The guy thinks that, apart from memories of his past life, he is no different from the locals. When Baijai finishes packing, a red-eyed silver-plated gold-level fish comes to him. She is the spiritual pet of his father, the strongest man in this world. The fish calls him down and says that breakfast is ready. He goes downstairs and sees that his mother, father, sister, and grandfather are sitting in front of a freshly cooked breakfast. He immediately greets everyone individually and sits down at the table. His disgruntled father tells Zio that his speed is too slow and that nothing is more important to men than speed. He also says that soon he will have 5 seconds for general fees. Zion is at first a little surprised by the severity of his current father, but quickly understands him and immediately replies that he understood him. Next, he asks his grandfather about when he arrived. His grandfather, Bai Jingchun, is the caretaker of Balin City himself. He replies to his grandson that today he will have an annual awakening ritual. The man says that as the caretaker of the city, he should make an encouraging speech to the students. His grandfather also tells Zion that he is taking the exam this year and that therefore he will also take part in the ceremony today. Grandpa clearly likes this idea. Zion answers him in the affirmative. The awakening ceremony. Aka, the annual awakening ceremony of the spiritual beast of the Liju Federation. Every year at this time, the Federation holds a wake-up ceremony to help young people and students. If everything goes well, then you can get into the Academy of Animal Tamers to learn more about them. If the awakening fails, only ordinary schools will open the door in front of you. This is one of the most important moments in every person's life, somewhat similar to the college entrance exams in Zion's past life. After admission, you will have a bright future, various classes, and improving your skill level. It's okay if a person fails the exam. He will just live the life of an ordinary person. Zion thinks it's just a lie to console himself, since this is the world of the Beast Lords. Without this talent, it doesn't matter how powerful and rich your family is. Others will look down on you. The talent of controlling beasts determines a person's status in this world. Without it, even an ant won't talk to you. Previously, Zioen was only worried that the god of time travel was too generous to him, giving him strength, money, and an attractive face. The guy thinks that if his face gets hurt, a lot of young girls will shed bitter tears. Fortunately, a month ago, he had awakened his talent for conquering a rank beasts. And this talent is intuition, spiritual talent of a rank. Thanks to a good intuition, a person will be able to receive special premonitions, as well as better understand the thoughts of spiritual beasts. This is a great talent for a beast tamer. Its range of use is quite extensive. Logorodaria, he can control good and evil during the battle. It also helps to simply communicate with animals, which helps in taming them. Zioen comes to the conclusion that the ceremony will not affect him in any way, because he is out of the risk zone. However, his grandfather thinks exactly the opposite. A man thinks that intuition is a good talent. However, he does not guarantee that the awakening will go smoothly. He knows that Zio is the one whose development is tirelessly watched by the most influential of the families. The old man understands that in the future the young man will be capable of what he cannot do. He thinks that the young mind lacks stability, and that if he gets to the very place, the monsters will just bite him. A man understands that it's worth flunking him before his abilities become more stable. Bai Jingchun warns his grandson and tells him not to underestimate the awakening ceremony. He proclaims that the Awakening Godstone is a treasure of the highest level and that there is only one copy of it in the entire Federation. The man also reports that this stone has a special origin. At the beginning of a new era, ferocious monsters came to this world, who put the human race on the brink of survival, practically exterminating it. It was then that the ancestors of all mankind discovered the Awakening Stone. And then the first generation of beast lords awakened their talents. People survived by discovering the era of spiritual beasts. Thanks to the Awakening Stone, they managed to resist a kind of ruthless monsters. We can even say that this stone is the cornerstone of civilization, which looks after the animals and us. Beginners who want to become masters of beasts must go through 3 stages. They need to awaken talent, build space, and tame the first beast. Also, in addition, there are young talents, people from aristocratic families or special clans. However, even they are required to take part in the annual ritual of enlightenment. The goal is to use the power of the stone to build a space for the beast. All this is reported by Zioen's grandfather and also warns him about the importance of the Awakening Stone. At this moment, a question warms the young man. The guy asks his grandfather if in this case the Federation should not be against such a system and the purpose of using the Awakening Stone. Zioen's father holds his breath for a moment, and the next second his grandfather bursts into laughter. The man replies that the Federation is well aware of all this and just turns a blind eye to this. He gets up from his seat and informs that the newcomers who took part in the ceremony are required to register in the Hall of Awakening. Bai Jing says that after registration they are entered into the Unified Register of Masters, after which the energy for awakening will be spent much easier. He approaches Zioen and puts his hand on his shoulder, betraying the importance of his subsequent words. He proclaims that the power of the stone is very great and that it will greatly help him in the near future. Zioen replies to him that he knows and understands this perfectly. He informs his grandfather that this is why he treats the ceremony with all seriousness. The young man proclaims that he has been studying the management of animals and the awakening of talents for quite a long time. However, he says that he doesn't know much information about the stone. The guy is surprised to say that a single stone supports the fortune of millions of Federation members. Zioen enthusiastically proclaims that this phenomenon is extremely incredible for its kind. At this moment, his father gets up from the table and shouts to Zioen that real men do not waste time on empty thoughts. He proclaims that Zioen's primary task is to build a space for the beast. A little scared, the guy answers in the affirmative. Noticing his father's rude tone, Zioen's mother irritably tells her father that he is pushing everything too hard. From such a remark, the man is a little embarrassed and looks away. He replies to his wife that he is simply placing accents in this way and not that he is not forcing anything at all. At this moment, in order to dilute the situation, grandfather Zioen starts laughing and pats his grandson and son on the heads. All family members start laughing and then continue their morning meal. After breakfast, Zioen goes to the Awakening Square. When Zioen gets out of the car, his grandfather tells Tom to go to the Awakening Hall. Grandfather himself proclaims that he will prepare his speech for now. The young man gets out of the car and sees a huge crowd in the Awakening Square. The guy sees one student waving a red flag and invites applicants of the Balin Academies to her side. Next to her, a crowd of applicants who apply to study at elite academies is lined up. The student notices such a famous grandson of the caretaker of the city and, seeing him, immediately goes to him. She greets him. Further on, more and more female students gather around Zioen in droves and begin a lively conversation. The guy is gradually beginning to be surrounded by ardent fans. They proclaim that they have not seen young Master Bai for so long, and yet they say that he remains just as beautiful. The affiliated college of Balin City is the most advanced in the city. Therefore, most of the students of this college are descendants of high-ranking officials of the city. Of course, being the grandson of the caretaker of the city, Bai-Jian is at the very top of this chain. So to speak, a dandy of the highest class. That's why the students treat him so kindly. Suddenly, a healthy boy comes out from under the crowd, blocking people in his path. He rushes to Bai-Jian with open arms and almost hugs him when they meet. However, Zai-On shields herself from his embrace and looks indignantly at the overweight guy. Meanwhile, through tears, he proclaims that Anya's brother has been missing for a whole month and that's why he missed him. Bai-Jian even more contorts his face with indignation and now finally does not understand what the guy standing in front of him is talking about. He asks the guy if he could stop talking to him in such a grumpy tone. Bai-Jian also says that if anyone sees this, they might think that the two of them are having an affair. The chubby guy looks dumbfounded at Zai-On and asks him about how he can say such things. Zai-On proclaims that Puffy Yuan really does not live up to his nickname Yuan Potion. Zai-On recalls that at first he thought Yuan-chan was destined to become a hero because of this, but as time went on, his body became more and more rounded, which is why everyone gave up on it. The guy thinks that remembering the past is quite difficult. You can't bring his youth back that way. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Zai-On calls a female voice. She proclaims that the guy was not at school for a whole month, that she thought that he was already scared. The young lady makes a condition for Bai-Jian that if he obediently admits defeat, she will let him go. Meet Fen Kai-Yu, daughter of Feng Yanyan, deputy director of Bailin Castle. Looking up, Bai-Jian remembers the girl. He also remembers that she offered Zai-On a bet a month ago. According to its terms, whoever gets the best talent at the awakening ceremony will win, and the loser will have to fulfill the winner's wish. The young man responds to the girl's exclamations by saying that she started it all herself. Bai-Jian also proclaims that perhaps he is afraid of appearing too arrogant. However, he immediately says that the girl will lose. Then Fen Kai repeatedly asks the guy if he is ready to fulfill the bet. The young man does not refuse. Bai-Jian says that he is waiting and will not wait for the moment when she will fulfill his wish. He calls her a phoenix baby, which makes the fire of the competition flare up even more. The guy confidently warns Fen Kai not to cry later. At this moment, the young man thinks that he has a 90% chance that he will win this argument. He thinks that in all the same, even in the entire Kyushu Federation, level 5 talents are a real rarity. This is not to mention that the Spider Lair is a secret world under the protection of the Kyushu Federation. At this time, the girl realizes that Bai-Jian called her an annoying nickname for her. Because of this, Fen Kai becomes furious and furiously tells Tom not to call her that. But Zai-On feels like everything is smooth. He's just walking away from her, and the students standing next to her gradually calm down Fen Kai. Unable to stand it, the girl exclaims after Bai-Jian that sooner or later he will definitely bow down before her. Bai-Jian is followed by his chubby friend. Along the way, he tells Bai-Jian that he should be careful since this time Fen Kai has his own supplier. Puffy Yuan also says that his father told him that the Feng family had received a special treasure that helps them to awaken their talents. Hearing this, Bai-Jian replies that in this case it is not surprising that baby Phoenix is so confident in herself. However, the young man says that he is not surprised at all. After all, the Feng family has a special origin and a solid foundation. Therefore, Bai-Jian believes that it is quite natural that they have unique methods. Nevertheless, Bai-Jian is confident that Fen Kai will not cause him any extra problems because his intuition did not feel anything strange from her. After talking for a while, they go to the Awakening Square where a speech is about to be delivered. Bai Jingchun welcomes all the students who came from different schools. The man introduces himself to the whole crowd and proclaims that he is the Lord of Bailin City. He says that even as a lord, it is a great honor for him to welcome their young talents, brimming with energy and possessing limitless potential. Bai Jingchun warns that the awakening ritual is only one step on a person's life path. He says that regardless of the results of their awakening, that is, the students should continue to live a normal life and work for the common good. At the end of his speech, he says that he hopes that they will all be able to wake up. The man wishes the crowd of students good luck. After that, the square is filled with ardent applause. Then all the students are called to the Hall of Awakening, and the candidates are ordered to go to the hall in groups and in order. Puffy Yuan and Bai-Jian enter the hall and start looking for their seats. The counselors at the entrance asks all students to find their seats and sit cross-legged, and then start awakening their talent. There is a huge emerald-colored stone in the middle of the hall, and all the candidates for awakening talent are sitting next to it in a rounded shape. Having found his seat, Bai-Jian also sits down and crosses his legs. After the Kyushu Federation activates the Divine Awakening Stone using the spatial projection method, they will project the power of the Awakening Stone into the awakening halls in various regions, which is a real miracle. All applicants begin to sit down in their seats, and then begin the process of awakening talent. Bai-Jian does the same. Crossing his legs, he sits down and clenching two fists, puts them opposite. Thus, he gets, so to speak, the pose of a monk. Bai-Jian begins the process of awakening talent. A blue spiritual aura ignites through his body and begins to cover his entire body. Suddenly, Bai feels that the tide of awakening is getting stronger and stronger. He understands that the energy of awakening is out of his control. The guy gets incredibly hurt. The energy literally flows into his body. It flows directly to his head. Suddenly, Bai remembers that the brain is one of the most important organs and that if the energy of awakening damages it, he can become a complete fool. He comes to the conclusion that he needs to protect him immediately. But suddenly there comes a voice that exclaims that maybe everything is not as bad as he thinks. Bai still decides to trust her and decides not to do anything against her. From under the crowded hall of awakening, caretakers and supervisors begin to notice that something other than the awakening process is happening in one corner of the hall. Like fireworks, lights begin to light up in this place. The supervisors begin to search for the data of the examining and see that it is none other than the grandson of the Lord. The staff of the awakening hall begins to panic. Then the chief of them orders another employee to quickly report this to the lord of the city, because in this case they could not allow something to happen to the grandson of the city. One of the controllers calls the gentleman, and he immediately comes. Bai immediately asks the audience about why no one told him that his grandson has problems with the awakening process. Then one of the staff announces that a certain image has appeared over Bai's head. Immediately, a noise rises because of the huge image seen right above Bai's head. None of the staff understands what is happening in this place. Seeing the image, the old man exclaims that it is a vision of talent. This special phenomenon can only occur when a person's talent has reached level 5 or higher. The man does not understand how this happened in the case of his grandson, since he has just awakened the talent to control animals. Then he wonders if it could be that Zion's intuition has mutated and reached the 5th level. In the world of royal beasts, there are sometimes beasts that can mutate. Being one of the representatives of the living beings of this world, man also has the ability to mutate. The human mutation is a kind of talent of the royal beasts. The number of animal tamers possessing mutation can be counted with the fingers of 2 hands. Every person with mutated talent is a real celebrity or legendary figure. And if in the case of the process of awakening Zion's talent, his talent mutates, then the process will be extremely dangerous. Realizing this, the Lord begins to worry about his grandson. He asks the chief controller, Mr. Wu, to let him enter the awakening hall. Mr. Wu, meanwhile, tells Tom not to embarrass him, because the Hall of Awakening is under the direct control of the Kyushu Federation. As the Lord of Balan City, a man is forbidden to enter the Hall of Awakening. The gentleman begins to calm Bai Jingchun and tells him not to worry, since the Kyushu Federation has a high-quality defense mechanism. He assures me that his grandson will be fine. Mr. Wu proclaims that the young talents of this world have no comparison, and also says that he is very lucky with his grandson. However, his exclamations do not console the man in any way. At this time, a completely different thinking process is going on in Bai Jian's head. The energy of the awakening stone is still entering his head, which makes the guy's head start to hurt a lot. Suddenly, the place where the grandson of the lord of the city is sitting explodes. There are 3 things between heaven and earth: divine knowledge, earth knowledge, and human knowledge. Wu Bai Anya gets out of control of the last element, which leads him to. Finally, the long-awaited awakening process ends and all applicants begin to get up from their seats. Gradually, the awakening stone begins to threaten and loses its former ardent light, which illuminated the dark hall of awakening. Everything ends in an instant and the lights are turned on. Bai Jian also gets up from his seat, and at the same moment he finds it amazing that heaven knows. The earth also knows what he knows. He finds it something very crazy. Opening his eyes, he then sees that he has formed a mythical talent called the Eye of the Apocalypse. This is a mythical level mystical talent. Intuition and the ability to predict, the ability to see celestial signs and be a kind of center of everything that happens. There are 9 levels of talent in this world. Among them, F, E, D, C, B, A, S, 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 S. SSS rank talents correspond to the Supreme Lord of Beasts. Bai Jian comes to the conclusion that a talent of mythical origin is something in the spirit of unheard of. He wonders if it could be that his talent is subject to a talent above SSS rank. The guy wonders if it could be that he is simply being played to deceive. He looks at his mystical talent, and then he looks up at the crowded hall, in which people one by one begin to go out. But the guy notices one oddity. He notices over the heads of people from the acquired skills and abilities that they have just appeared. For example, one girl in the hall has a wind spirit talent, which is an elementary talent of a rank. The ability to use wind power to enhance the skill of wind element pets. And one guy has a powerful talent at all, which enhances the talent of D rank, or rather the talent of pets. At one point, the realization comes to Bai Jian's head that this is the effect of the Eye of the Apocalypse. The young man is dying on the spot and does not believe his eyes. The guy understands that according to this characteristic of the Eye of the Apocalypse, nothing in the neighborhood is able to hide from his eyes. This means that presumably before the battle, Bai Jian can learn the opponent's management talent, the abilities of his pet, strengths and weaknesses, and even spiritual strength before the battle. Bai Jian comes to a very important point in his head relating to his newly acquired ability. This means that this time his chances of winning the upcoming fights will increase incredibly. The guy starts laughing maliciously and anticipating victory. He makes a serious face and then walks around the hall. He looks at the talents that other candidates have awakened. He notices the talents of C/D rank in many candidates and considers this a very good result. But he notices talents of a rank in some of the candidates and believes that they are probably subject to local prodigies. Suddenly, he remembers the Awakening Stone and looking up comes to the conclusion that he needs to crank his ability with the Awakening Stone. Looking up, the guy sees something very strange. Or rather, that the Awakening Stone is a spiritual beast. As spiritual beast, there was also some information about Bai Jian's newly acquired skill. His talent is a life leap, and his status is the smallest deity. Abilities: Awakening of Talent, Absorption of Vitality, and Resurrection. Features: the seed of the ancient tree of life, with the talent of life leap, can contribute to biological progress. There was also information about the Awakening Stone. His race: ancient tree of life, talent, life leap, and status also belongs to a minor deity. After learning that the stone is a legendary beast of the divine level, Bai Jian is thrilled on the spot. But then, having decided to pull himself together, he again makes a serious face and continues his guesses in his thoughts. The guy thinks that the stone helps countless animals to awaken their talents and become the creators of a prosperous era. Bai Jian also can't believe that he has discovered that the legendary God Awakening Stone, which is the cornerstone of the Federation, is actually a disguised divine-level beast. At this moment, one of the supervisors calls all the students to line up according to their numbers and register their awakening rank. Bai Jian stands up without hesitation, and the cue to continue his thoughts and arguments is already there. He wonders if the leadership of the Federation knows about this. He thinks that if they know, then he will be fine, and if not. However, the guy remembers that it's not for nothing that they treat this stone as the most valuable treasure. At this time, information about what a person means, this or that color, is expressed on a plate with ranks. White is a normal skill. Green is a basic skill, blue is an intermediate skill, pink is an advanced skill, orange is a higher skill, and the largest gold is a divine skill. Standing in line, Bai Jian, looking at the scoreboard, suggests that there is a chance of awakening several SS rank talents, maybe a few more orange talents. And looking up, he sees his talent, which is subject to the golden color. The young man thinks that this will be a real shock for the Federation, but still gets in line. He calmly gets in line and sees how other students determine their ranks. Bai Jian turns around and looks at the stone, thinking that this world is not as simple as he imagined. When the turn comes to the guy, he is asked to put his hand on the device that determines the rank. Bai Jian remembers his skills and comes to the conclusion that everything is no longer important and that all these puzzles are not in his competence. He thinks that when his strength reaches a certain level, the secrets of this world will reveal themselves to him. The young man puts his hand on the device and then the controller starts punching information about it in his computer. Testing of his rank begins and Bai Jian realizes that the path of genius awaits him, which shocks the blogging public. Anticipating future glory, he is already bending the whole world to his feet in his thoughts. But when they announce to him that his awakened talent is just intuition and that this skill is subject to a rank, the guy is amazed and does not understand how this happened to him. But in the very next second, the device that distributes the ranks reproduces an error in its work. The device starts beeping and proclaims that the rank of Bai Jian cannot be identified. This makes the guy even more surprised and petrified on the spot. Other personnel begin to approach the device in order to find out what is happening here. The young man does not understand more and more what is happening here. But suddenly Mr. Wu comes out of nowhere. He warns everyone that this device is only capable of identifying talents below S rank. He also reports that it has been a long time since someone in the city awakened talent of such a high level. Mr. Wu Lao proclaims that the talent born in the process of awakening, besides being associated with the talent of a rank intuition as a young man, must be a talent of S rank super intuition. Mr. Wu Lao makes such an assumption and asks the controllers to write it down in the registration stoics. They listen to him without hindrance. Finally, Mr. Wu Lao proclaims that talent of this rank is quite rare and that this child has a bright future. The controller informs Bai Jian that he is now a first-class student at Balin College and that his awakened spiritual talent is an S-rank superintendent. After hearing this, many applicants notice that the legend of the future is on a par with them. One by one they begin to stick to him. One of them proclaims that Bai Jian has a legendary talent of high rank and that this is quite surprising for such a young man. Others say that his grandfather is a diamond-level beast lord, and Bai Jian himself awakened a high-level talent at such an age. They exclaim as one that he is a worthy son of his parents. But he himself is not happy about this, because he understands that his real talent is also mythical. However, the young man still makes a calm and joyful face so as not to make this case public in a public place. The crowd exclaims that when he grows up, he will necessarily become a great master. And at this moment, people surrounding Bai Jian remind him not to forget about them when he becomes successful and strong. Some even say that they knew from the very beginning that a great future awaits him. This does not particularly upset Bai Jian. On the contrary, he likes the fact that they pay more attention to him, albeit because of his high abilities, and not because they previously communicated well. And at this moment, unable to stand it, the controller standing opposite asks them not to delay the queue and step aside so that Bai Jian goes to the exit. Everyone instantly falls into place, and Bai Jian leaves. When he leaves, he thinks that everyone is somehow excited, that somehow he is not even used to it. The young man thinks that this is amazing. Namely, that his talent is outside the range of the talent assessment device, since it was a certification tool of the Federation. Tens of thousands of candidates have been tested with it, and this has never happened. The guy finds it very strange. As soon as he comes out, his grandfather immediately comes to meet him. Immediately, the man asks the guy about how his awakening process went and whether there was anything unusual. Bai Jian asks him back about when he came. Bai Jingchun doesn't say anything. Then Bai Jian replies that everything went relatively well for him. However, he still says that there is something he regrets. The young man apologizes to his grandfather with a guilty look and informs him of his regrets. Bai Jian says he didn't have time to take advantage of the opportunity to build a space for the beast. To this, in response, his grandfather puts his hand on his shoulder and proclaims that what he just said does not matter since he changed the A rank to the S rank. The man says that his merit is most important. He also says that with their resources, they will quickly help Bai Jian to build a space for the beast. Just as Bai Jian opens his mouth to tell his grandfather that he has actually acquired another ability, an inner voice tells him not to say anything. The guy immediately stops and decides to listen to the voice. This is a warning function of his Eye of the Apocalypse talent. Instead, Bai Jian informs his grandfather that he wants to start learning his talent from Into. The man replies to his grandson that in this case they will come to a place where no one will bother them. They walk out together. But Bai Jian slows down his steps. The young man comes to the conclusion that he cannot tell even his family members about his mythical talent, and that from now on he should be more careful with the words that fly out of his mouth. To begin with, the guy decides to conduct a couple of experiments, the first stage of which is exploration. Bai Jian and Bai Jingchun begin to gradually leave the Hall of Awakening. When they come out, Bai Jian looks at the enemy intelligence beast and his ability allows him to see the beast's abilities as well. He sees that this beast is a fire dog. The young man remembers that his detection range is about 10 meters. He realizes that no treasure will escape his eyes and abilities. Looking closely at the awakening square, he notices people with many talents. He marvels at his ability to see everything. After taking a closer look, he notices that he can detect human artifacts. The young man thinks that when his strength increases, the possibility of research will also expand. He comes to the conclusion that later it will be possible to make the visibility range cover the whole world. From the realization of such power, Bai Jian begins to rejoice and realizes that if his abilities increase further, he will become a legendary all-seeing god. Bai Jian and Bai Jingchun are just starting to leave the Hall of Awakening when there is a rumble from the back of the building. Looking up, suddenly in front of them they see a blazing red fire that engulfed all the buildings of the tower. Seeing this, Bai Jian immediately remembers the phoenix. His grandfather instantly proclaims that this is the cry of the phoenix, or more precisely, the flame of the phoenix. The man explains that this is a talent of the S-rank phoenix flame of the Feng family and that they are also lucky to have an heir. Then Bai Jian remembers that he originally planned to show off in front of Fen Kai and Yu and look at her shocked face. But after hearing this, he realizes that they are both S-rank holders and that in this case they both remain in a draw. The young man is very upset by this news. Bai Jian proclaims that if that's all, then he will go home. However, his grandfather stops him and calls his two twins, assistants, whose names are Bai Zhai and Bai Xiao. He tells Bai Jian that if he has awakened an S-rank talent, then he will definitely find someone who holds a grudge against him, and that from now on he will constantly pursue him. The man says that therefore he should not act alone and rely on security. The first is Bai Zhai. She informs that she is the mistress of the golden rank beasts. Behind her comes Bai Xiao. She also says that she is a representative of the golden rank beasts. At this moment, Bai Jian comes to the conclusion that his grandfather really prepared well for his awakening. And then Bai Jingchun hands the guy the key to the treasury. He tells the young man that after he returns, he needs to use the Limbai stone to build a space for the beast. Bai Jian's eyes light up and he picks up the treasured key made of precious material. Then he thanks his grandfather. Limbai stone contains special powers that give advantages when building a space for animals. Only the Beast Lord can resort to using this stone to break through a new level. The price of one such stone is at least 1 million Federation coins. Nevertheless, the stone is considered priceless. After the Hall of Awakening, Bai Jian goes to his family's vault and orders Bai Zhai and Bai Xiao to stay outside and also guard his chambers. The guy is obeyed, and he himself begins to enter the vault. First, he substitutes the key to the door and the key is confirmed, as well as identification with early eye and blood data. Finally, the cherished door opens and the young man enters the vault. In this place, all the savings of the Bai family for many hundreds of years are located. What is stored here has hardly caught the eye of anyone in the outside world. For example, the ghost spider core appeared at an auction 5 years ago. The most influential families fought hard for the lot. In the end, the Feng family made 150 million from his sales. Opening various boxes, Bai Jian finally finds the one he needs. He finds the Linbi stone that was in the box of the far drawer. This box is estimated at 300 yuan, which in translation into the currency of the Federation amounts to 300 million. And there are more than 10 such boxes in this place, so the amount comes out of this very solid. Realizing this, Bai Jian's eyes light up, and he realizes how rich his family is. The strength of a space beast is directly related to the talent of its owner. A beast lord with a talent of rank F requires no more than 1 stone when building a space. For us rank, it takes about 30. Since Bai Jian has a mythical level talent and he will need 200 or 300 pieces, he comes to the conclusion that this should be more than enough for the construction of space. The young man sits down on the Linbi stones and begins the process of repetition. The process begins and his eye opens. Then the first thing you get is a notification about the non-free service of the Enlightenment of Heaven. The notice states that the normal space for watching mythical beasts costs 333 Linbi stones. The improved space for watching mythical beasts costs 666 Linbi stones. And finally, the ideal space for watching mythical beasts costs 999 Linbi stones. Seeing such prices, the young man is surprised and immediately freezes on the spot. However, while he is in doubt, the eye itself tells him the right answer. At the moment, this ability works better than any encyclopedia. The mythical talent Eye of the Apocalypse may have many open functions that are just waiting to be discovered. But Bai Jian comes to the conclusion that it doesn't matter how many there will be. To begin with, he decides to build a space for the beast. He chooses the perfect space for the beast and thereby donates 999 Linbi stones to implement his idea. At this moment, his grandfather and father are drinking tea outdoors. Grandfather calms his father by telling him not to take everything to heart. He also says that Zai Owen's talent is unique and that therefore building a beast space takes up much more energy and resources than others. But suddenly his grandfather feels a certain aura of his grandson. Then he realizes that the construction of Zai Owen's space is finished. And at this very moment, Zai Owen wastes the entire supply of Linbi stones and through meditation begins to get into his space to observe the animals. Opening his eyes, he sees a beautiful valley in front of him, in which there are many plants and many snarling mountains. He is amazed at such beauty. Beauty considers his space absolutely incredible. Then the young man remembers that the textbook description of the first created space looks like this, a one-color space of about 10 square meters. He begins to compare this and his space, where there are mountains and rivers, and also its space can accommodate 1,000 animals. Looking up, he sees a scoreboard with a warning and a reminder. There are additional effects of the ideal space of the beast. To be more precise, the first space can shorten the pet's growth time, the second space can remove the negative effects of the pet, and the third in the space there is a certain probability of discovering the hidden talents of the pet. As a rule, there are usually no negative effects in spaces, except in special cases. In the Bai Jian family, there are 3 additional heaven-defying effects in each space. In the beast world, as a rule, a spirit with more potential has a shorter growth cycle. Many beast lords did not live to see their beasts reveal their true selves. That is, at the moment when the beast penetrated into space, it was placed large and strong, but the owner was dead at that moment. In Bai Jian's space, beasts with great potential will grow much faster. Therefore, he comes to the conclusion that only by relying on the effect of space, he will be able to overcome the difficulties and become the youngest and most powerful beast lord in the history of his family and in general in the history of mankind as a whole. Space can remove negative effects. Bai Jian is tempted to look at this effect and begins his reasoning. In battle, a pet can be taken under control, poisoned, frostbitten, and burned. In short, the beast is exposed to many dangers than its owner. Then his combat capability will be lost. However, if the owner places the beast in the observation space, then after a while he will get a completely healthy beast. And the third effect, the effect of revealing hidden talents, is the strongest, since the talent of a spiritual beast has been fixed since its birth, and only with its help of legendary supreme treasures can it be strengthened or changed. The space of Bai Jian can reveal the hidden talents of animals. Besides, their number is not subject to limitation. Then the young man comes to the conclusion that the ideal space for observing animals, for which he spent 999 Linbi stones, did not disappoint him, but on the contrary encouraged him. Bai Jian thinks that in order to build something like this storage, and even in a family format, at least 1 billion is needed, and obviously not everyone can afford it. Fortunately, in this world, Bai Jian has no money problems. After the process of creating space for the beast, it begins to gather and exit the storage. As soon as he opens the profitable door, he immediately sees his family in its entirety. They start hugging. His mother exclaims that her dear son has lost a lot of weight in the last week. Grandfather casually strokes his grandson's head, fidgeting with his hair, and his sister and father look at Bai Jian with a smile. Immediately after their meeting, Bai Jian sat down to eat. One by one, he is already eating almost a third plate of rice. The whole family looks at him with wide open eyes. The young man slurps loudly and eats a decent plate of food. Finally, a little sated, he raises his head and makes a happy face. Seeing this, his mother puts him more supplements with the words that this is his favorite stewed pork. She tells him to eat more. At this moment, the guy remembers something. Putting pieces of stewed pork into his mouth one by one, he calls out to his grandfather. The man looks questioningly at his grandson. Then Bai Jian announces in a rather calm tone that he built a space for the beast and spent 999 limbai stones on it. What was said does not fit into his grandfather's head, from which he is thrilled on the spot. His father reacts in a similar way, and his mom is already preparing to calm them both down. Then his father almost catches his heart. Wiping his face from sweat with a handkerchief, his grandfather finally says that fortunately, the Bai family is not in poverty and that otherwise they would not be able to afford to think about such an expense. Grandpa also says that he didn't think that a mutated S-rank talent would absorb so much energy and resources. After eating all the dishes offered in a row, Bai Jian makes a satisfied face. Seeing this, his grandfather proclaims that a fish has recently spawned. He asks Bai Jian if he wants to see her. Grandpa also says that if everything works out, then she can become his spiritual beast. A diamond-level grandfather beast, a red-eyed goldfish, immediately comes to Bai Jian's mind. He immediately says if it's her by chance. However, he does not have time to finish the sentence, as here he begins to be drawn to empty his intestines. Covering his mouth with his hands, the guy informs the family that he has eaten a little too much and that he is starting to feel sick. After so much embarrassing incident, Grandpa and Bai Jian go to the spirit beast egg storage. Bai Jian has never been to such places before, so when he comes in, the young man's mouth opens wide from what he saw. Dozens of scientists and supervisors, even more wires and glass tubes appear before him in their perfect glory. And Bai Jingchun is not the first time in such places, so do not be particularly surprised by the situation. Passing by several scientists who are holding an egg in a glass tube in their hand, the young man notices that this is a goldfish that is subject to the water element. He can already see the egg's talent and skill. The most interesting thing is that there are a lot of such aquatic fish in the storage. The fact is that the Bai family is a family of aquatic pets with their own unique secrets of stable cultivation. There are also resources necessary for the growth of an aquatic pet. It follows from this that all the first spiritual animals in their family must necessarily be aquatic. The young man, with his mouth open, walks around the egg storage and greedily looks out for every last crumb. Bai Jian assumes that, relying on the resources of the Bai family, his own children will already have enough strength to gain a foothold in the ranks of the beast lords in the shortest possible time. And this storehouse of spiritual beast eggs was created especially for the Bai family. The lowest level of eggs in this vault here is primary silver. The best of them can reach the level of gold. However, Bai Jian believes that this level is not enough for his bar at all. On the contrary, the young man believes that since he is the heir of the family, then his spiritual beast should be the best. And at this moment, he and his grandfather come to a huge aquarium where there is a red-eyed goldfish of the diamond level. Beholding her, Bai Jian's eyes light up and he still considers her on duty. Meanwhile, his grandfather Bai Jingchun is still serene. Thanks to his talent, the young man sees detailed information about the fish. For example, that her skill is windbreak, water arrows and waves. Also, the presentation of the fish, an unusual talent. There is a possibility of intersection. However, Bai Jian wonders why his grandfather's pet has damage in its origins. Meanwhile, his grandfather informs his pet that Zioen has successfully awakened the talent of controlling animals. He also says that he hopes that his baby will be born soon. Bai Jian comes to the conclusion that he needs to check whether he can use his talent to restore the origin of the fish. Then the fish opens its arms and two small eggs are visible from it. Seeing this, Bai Jian is even more delighted and surprised, and his grandfather proclaims that they need to look at which of these two eggs suits Bai Jian more. Raising his eyes, Bai Jian looks at one egg in order to see its abilities, and then he sees that this egg belongs to the category of Supreme Amethyst. His talent, Royal Water Speed, a rush of water, a layer of foam and a water gun. And his idea looked like this. Born with a double talent, but due to high needs consumes a lot of energy, which can lead to life-threatening malnutrition. But Bai Jian was attracted not by the talent of the fish in the egg, but by his category of Supreme Amethyst and the fact that he was born with two talents. Therefore, among the descendants of red-eyed fish, such phenomena occur for the first time. He immediately tells his grandfather that he chooses the second egg. Bai Jingchun doesn't understand why he chose the second egg in a split second and started looking at the guy questioningly. Grandfather proclaims that his form is deformed and his color is dull, and his vitality is weak. He says that at first glance, this fetus has a birth defect. The man proclaims that perhaps he will be born into the world on his own. For these words, Bai Jingchun apologizes to the mother of the fetus and proclaims that all this is for the future of his grandson. Then Bai Jian replies that his intuition tells him that this is his ideal partner. And at this moment he thinks that perhaps there is no baby water beast in this world with more outstanding abilities than this one. His grandfather exclaims that since this is his intuition, he will not stop him. But first the man informs that he needs to ask permission from his mother. Bai Jian approaches the huge aquarium and asks his mother's permission about whether she will give the egg to him. Then his mother, without saying anything, spits a yellowish something similar to a cloth on the egg. At this moment, Bai Jingchun informs the guy that it is the scales of a red-eyed fish, and that it can enhance the spiritual power of water-type beasts. He also says that if a water beast inflicts this scale on itself, the effect of skills is enhanced by 10%. When Bai Jian is handed the coveted egg, he sees that the egg has the same scales covered all over the egg. Grandfather explains again that this is a gift from his mother and that in this way she increases his chances of survival, helps him to be born. Bai Jian picks up an egg and, looking at his mother, assures her that he will do everything possible to grow it. He takes it as his promise to his mother. When he gets home, Bai Jian immediately puts an egg in the aquarium. He proclaims that it is necessary for the scales to be connected. After that, the young man takes a couple of potions from the cabinet and begins to sort them carefully. Then he adds hard enveloping flowers, dragon whiskers, nutrient solution made from high-quality medicinal materials such as snow lotus seeds, lemongrass, purple orchid leaves, cave tree fruits, red haze fruits, blood crystal grass and others. Mixing all this, he adds all the potions at once, which causes bubbles to form in the water and the water itself begins to turbid. But the main thing is that all the potions reach the egg, after which a tiny-looking sprout called an egg begins to grow more and more. In the end, the egg begins to shine and then it happens. It flares up with a sinewy fire and the water begins to fill with bubbles more and more. After Bai Jian scattered the potions into the aquarium with the egg, it began to light up and gradually rise into the air. With his mouth wide open, he looked at it, waiting for it to be redeemed. He knew that the Eye of the Apocalypse technique made the egg perfect. Without waiting for the egg to be redeemed, Bai Jian himself lifted it into the air. After that, he tells the egg that they will sign a contract together. After creating a magical space and then placing the egg and himself in it, he signed a contract with the egg. Immediately after that, the egg began to crack and then it began to break a little from the inside. When it finally hatched, a white fish with blue eyes and fur came out of it. A month later, this newborn fish fought in the ring with a beast of the 5th rank. The fish took the beast with its teeth and began to gnaw the opponent's stomach. After that, she immediately knocked him to the ground when his grip loosened. Supervisors and medical workers immediately rushed to the ring to stop the fight and look at the wounds of the rival fish rodent. The opponent was knocked down and lying on the ground unconscious. 3 people from the staff approached him. One of them proclaims that he was beaten with 1 blow and that this is already too much. But when they look up, they see that the fish is still glaring at the ring with their presence. The staff immediately falls silent and is terrified on the spot. They take his rival away with them and decide not to catch his eye anymore. And the audience, who saw it all, on the contrary, is delighted with such a finale. They exclaim that the master's pet is cool, and that if a fish is able to defeat a 5th-rank beast almost immediately after birth, then it will have even greater prospects in further battles. The crowd is delighted and consider this fight something like fiction. Some even say that water-type spiritual beasts are no longer his rivals. However, with a high-level beast of another type, it would not be easy to have a fish. In any case, they as one believe that this fish is considered special. The fact is that after signing the contract, Bai Jian placed the pet in a space for raising animals. And soon the fish caused a random effect of space and awakened a new talent. And thanks to the power of the S-rank yin, he acquired the purple skill Deep Erosion. The qualification was also upgraded to Royal. The Kingdom of Beasts is divided into Worthless, Iron, Bronze, Silver, Gold, Diamond, Amethyst, Royal, Legendary, and Divine. Thus, there is a certain hierarchy, or, to put it another way, on tiptoe, the Animal Kingdom. The unfit are a class of beasts before they are born, divided into 9 levels. After maturation, they pass into the Iron class, and then, after some testing, you can find out their further development. Looking at his newborn fish, which is just one, the young man remembers that they also need to work out in the fresh air. Bai Jian decides that this process is considered one of the most important. He calls the fish to him and putting it in his arms, calls Bai Jian Bai Xiao. They immediately appear near him. The young man asks them to prepare for a trip to the city, to which the guard responds in the affirmative. There are 7,000 spider nests and 7 main cities in this world. A network of other smaller cities is formed around each of them. In this way, the Glottons of the whole world are built. The place Bai Jian is heading to is one of the 7 daughter towns of Balin City. This is the city of Candle Flame. There is a volcano in this city, which is inhabited by a kind of spider-like spiritual beast of the fiery element, which is called the Candle Flame Spider. He does not enter the higher realm. Therefore, Bai Jian decides that this is the perfect beast for training his water fish. Next, Bai Jian and Bai Xiao go to the airport in order to get to another city to fight a water fish and a candle flame spider. But as soon as they approach the registration stoic, they are immediately left by the cry of a young girl who calls the boys. Bai Jian recognizes him immediately. It turns out to be his old girlfriend Fen Kian. Enraged, she immediately asks him why he doesn't notice her. The young man thinks, does not turn around and proclaims that he and she have both awakened S-rank talent. This naturally suggests that they are almost on an equal level, which he informs her about. The girl begins to blush even more with rage and anger, and Bai Xiao begins to look at her with interest. But Fen Qian won't let up. She says that so far they are on the same level. But, according to her, Bai Jian left the Hall of Awakening, thereby showing disrespect to her. She furiously asks the guy if her qualifications are not enough for him to take her seriously. Fen Qian also reports that after he left the Hall of Awakening, she looked for him everywhere and even went home. However, according to her, he tirelessly avoids contact with her. Bai Jian begins to sweat and does not understand what to say to the angry young lady. Therefore, deciding not to take her words seriously, he rolls his eyes and decides to just leave. Fen Qian still does not give up and starts provoking him, insulting him and saying that he is the last loser, a traitor with whom she is dealing. The guy thinks that they don't make any sense, and yet without betraying them, he leaves without even looking at her. Having stopped insulting him, she catches up with him and asks him to listen to what she has to say in the near future. She understands that he still won't listen to her words, so she pulls out her hand and asks him not to leave. Her hand is immediately removed by Bai Xiao. With a serious tone, she asks Fen Qian to have at least some respect for herself and not run after the guy like a tail. The girl looks at the new guard Bai Jian in disbelief and immediately feels the aura of the Golden Lord of Beasts from her look and facial expression. She immediately pulls her hand away and starts blushing. Immediately she becomes uncomfortable. She still says that she wants to argue with him again. Fen Qian tells the guy that when school starts, let their animals get infected against each other. Bai Jian does not refuse and proclaims that let everything be at her behest. This ends their dialogue, and he goes to the train station and starts waiting for his train. At this moment, he thinks that Fen Qian is too aggressive and that if it wasn't for the friendship between their families, he would have given her a good hard time long ago. Next, the loudspeaker says that the train of the city of Candle Flame will now arrive at the station. The microphone also asks passengers traveling in this direction to walk along the white line on the platform and line up according to their car number. There is a very dangerous wilderness between the cities of Balin, where spiritual beasts are literally everywhere. With the exception of the hunters of the Royal Beast Squad, few dare to wander in these wild lands. But the need to move between cities has not disappeared anywhere, so special means for traveling in the wild have been created. They are like a spiritual snail beast with 1,000 blades. The case is solid, made of steel of incredible strength. The length of each car is 1.5 meters. Each wagon can be transformed into a separate wagon if necessary. The higher the level of the train, the stronger it is and, accordingly, the more expensive the ticket. Of course, since Bai Jian has no problems with money, he chooses the best, perfect car. The guy thought about a place on the train right away and immediately booked himself a good place. Bai Jian goes to the above line and passes to the flight attendant who is standing near the train. They punch his hand and look at his identity and see that Bai Jian has a second-class ticket. However, this is not the ticket he booked at all. He looks at the flight attendant in disbelief, and she asks him to return to the second-class carriage. Although Bai Jian is surprised and does not want to go to the second-class carriage, he still reluctantly goes there with his own feet. Arriving there as one of the very first passengers, he goes into his thoughts. Bai Jian recalls that in order to gain experience, he must live like an ordinary person and have more contact with the outside world. It will be even better if the young man finds friends or allows someone to deceive himself. He believes that cheating is the best teacher. Bai Jian remembers his bodyguards and wonders why his grandfather even decided that he needed the protection of these two. He remembers that this is not his first life, which he lives in the guise of different people. The young man understands that if necessary, he himself is not averse to deceiving someone around his finger. Other passengers begin to enter the car, which even more irritates Bai Jian. Anya, one student, admires the view from the window of the open view of the city of Balin. In a voice, she begins to praise the landscapes of the city. Behind her, a whole crowd of students from the Beast Academies of Kyanan, the daughter city of Balin, enter. Bai Jian hears one of the students say that he wouldn't have been able to afford the trip if it wasn't for their school, which covered almost all the ticket bills. The young man understands that their bar is very low compared to him. Students start talking about their everyday needs and other things. The students of this school seem to be discussing someone unfamiliar to Bai Jian, and therefore he does not really go into the details of their conversation. He only hears that the girls of this school are wondering why someone like her was allowed to go out with them at all. They all proclaim that she may be destined to be born a loser. It is heard that a certain student is being bullied for something. The girls don't even bother to keep their voices down. Bai Jian does not understand who they are talking about, and therefore does not pay much attention to them. However, they still annoy him. But the boys' students are talking about their animals. This conversation is much more interested in the guy. Students begin to compare their animals with each other and sort out the strongest, in their opinion. This makes Bai Jian laugh, because thanks to his ability, he sees that their beasts have quite mediocre and ordinary talents. Looking closely, the young man sees a student in front of him and sees that his beast is a turtle with a stone shell. As expected, she has a pretty ordinary talent, look, skill, and class. After 1 year of training their animals, They haven't changed that much, which by his standards is clearly not the best indicator. Ordinary animals, ordinary talents. With a malicious smile, Bai Jian thinks about where such pathetic mediocre students can get to such a golden-handed beast trainer like him. The guy notices the huge difference between him and the students of ordinary schools, and frankly speaking, he is pleased that he is head and shoulders above ordinary students. Bai Jian notices the distant gaze of the students of the Kion and Beast Academies, which is directed at the girl sitting in front. The girl looks depressed and does not look anywhere except at her hands, where her animal is sitting. Thanks to her Eye of the Apocalypse ability, Bai Jian sees that this girl is the darling of fate, who has a mysterious S-rank talent that can hold other people's luck and use it. Next to this girl, another student of the same school passes by, who immediately stumbles next to her and almost falls on her. The student immediately gets up and starts accusing her of touching her. She threateningly proclaims, if something happens to her, she will have to take responsibility. The innocent girl sitting behind her seat immediately apologizes for nothing, to which, in response, there is an immediate cry that she should not talk to her. The student leaves, leaving the poor girl. Bai Jian, looking at her, thinks that S-rank talent belongs to the mythical. He is sure that, like her talent will turn the Hall of Awakening upside down. However, Bai Jian is worried about the question of why then such a talent disappears in such a small academy in the miserable town of Balin. He wonders why she was allowed to just miss out on such a talent. He decides to definitely deal with this issue. The train comes to the city of Candle Flame. Passengers are notified from the microphone that they have arrived at their destination. They are asked to take turns leaving the car in the order of the queue. Bai Jian immediately goes after that mysterious girl. He immediately calls Bai Xiao to him, and she immediately comes to him. Bai Jian shows that student and orders Bai Xiao to find out all the information about her. The first thought that comes to Bai Xiao's mind is that her master fell in love at first sight. She asks Bai Jian if this is really the case, for which she is immediately refused. Bai Jian proclaims that he did not have any such feelings. He says he just noticed something special about her. The young man exclaims that if he entices her to his side, then in the future the strength of his family will increase significantly. After the volcano, a small town, where it is located in a valley with an ordinary lawn, many spiders of the flame of a candle of the 5th level begin to appear. One by one they come out of the trees. Suddenly, Bai Jian comes to this place and calls his white-haired pet. The fish does not come immediately, but only after Bai Jian is shown to the mountain of cobwebs. After the appearance of the fish, he immediately breaks out from the paws of the web with the help of his beast. This weekend they infuriate a crowd of spiders. The aquatic fish at this time is also wondering why such insignificant spiders dared to challenge her. The fish immediately breeds 5 spiders into shreds and immediately knocks them to the ground. Only small pieces remain of them. Bai Jian is delighted that his beast immediately dealt with 5 spiders of the 5th level in a matter of seconds, and they were much stronger than those they met on the training ground. Bai Jian thinks that under normal circumstances, the water pistol they used in battle would just leave a hole in their heads. He wonders why it should be completely blown up right away. Then the eye instantly shows Bai Jian the answer to his question. Water gun. The impact force may vary during use. Then the young man understands why it was necessary. He comes to the conclusion that in this case he needs to find someone stronger. Only the fight against spiritual beasts that are above you in level contributes to the growth and development of skills. Depending on the skill level, it is divided into beginning, attempt, small achievement, big achievement, achievements, and success. Bai Jian's fish now has 5 skills, and if he doesn't work hard, they will remain at the lowest level and the strength will be minimal. Bai Jian goes into his thoughts for a few minutes, where he takes the example of a sword master. A novice master can chop 1 bamboo stalk. You have been a master for many years of training, that the skill has reached perfection. With a wave of the sword you are able to split a mountain. And that's the difference in skill. The same skill in the hands of different spirit beasts can have different effects and power. The young man enters into these reflections for a couple of minutes and does not notice at all that there is danger in front of him. He gets back to work and starts the battle all over again. A few weeks later, Bai Jian and his fish are training again and again, fighting spiders. And this time they have progress in the level. When spiders of large reach press on the fish with their web, it uses a water pistol to get rid of its enemy in a flash. And by the way, it always works. In the last battle, when another spider wrapped its web around the fish, it violently broke out of the cocoon with the help of its water power, blocking his ability. Bai Jian sees that his fish's level has reached the 8th level, and she has also added a couple of new talents. Suddenly, after the fight, Bai Xiao comes and informs that the information about the student that Bai Jian requested has been collected. It turns out to be a girl named Kyo Gubai. Her parents died in a car accident. There are no guardians. She has unusual abilities, such as mutual positions and mutual overcoming. So none of her relatives decided to take the girl to themselves. The girl considers it her duty to unlearn and awaken her talent, as she does not want her long-dead parents to remain in debt. In extreme cases, it will simply be sold to creditors. After entering college, many face troubles, big or small. The girl also experienced this from classmates or teachers. In truth, they had the warmest feelings for her. Bai Zhai reports that, fortunately, she is a strong person and that failure did not break her. It turns out that in her free time, in addition to working part-time, the girl is looking for other options to repay debts. However, the places where she worked were often closed, which made it even harder for her. At this moment, Bai Jian thinks that her talent seems to attract not luck itself, but on the contrary, only trouble. The young man proclaims that the girl has a clean past and a brave heart, and that therefore it is good. He is interested in what happened on the day she awakened her talent. Bai Zhai replies that Kyo Gubai was the last student to awaken her talent, and that when she passed through the equipment, she failed. She proclaims that at that time the staff had some difficulties, and they did not want to waste time on replacing the car and recertification, and therefore informed her that her talent belongs to the F rank. After hearing the information about her, Bai Jian sends Bai Zhai to Kyonan Academy to sort out her debts, and then he asks to transfer Kyo Gubai to the Beast Academy of Balin City. He proclaims that Kyo Gubai is perfect for recruitment. Bai Zhai's eyes immediately light up, and she comes to the conclusion that this is something other than just an assignment to pick up a poor girl for service. She answers in the affirmative to Bai Jian and thinks that, finally, spring has come on her mother's street. Payment of debts and transfer. And she perceived his school as courtship of a rich man and a manifestation of love. Blushing, she immediately prepared to leave. However, at this moment, she and Bai Jian hear a scream in front of them. Kyo Gubai herself resorts to them. A huge spider the size of a mountain comes running after her. Bai Jian is delighted that the girl herself came to his arms. He immediately releases his pet to help poor Kyo Gubai. The fish here releases a strong jet of water and directs it at the spider. The spider is immediately torn to shreds. Kyo Gubai looks in surprise at how the tiny fish managed to knock the huge spider to the ground. Deciding to leave the two alone, Bai Zhai, under the pretext that her iron is not turned off, leaves. She herself does not really leave, just hides nearby so that nothing happens to her master. Immediately after her departure, Bai Jian approaches Kyo Gubai and offers her his helping hand to get up. He asks her about her condition. Embarrassed, the girl gets up by herself without the help of Bai Jian. She gets up and proclaims that she saw a young man on the train. Then Bai Jian introduces himself and, pointing his finger at the fish, proclaims that it is his beast. Then Kyo Gubai also introduces herself and thanks him for his help and for saving her. At this moment, he remembers that he killed the black spider with one blow. From this she deduces that he may be very strong. Next, Bai Jian asks her where the rest of her classmates are and why she ended up here. Kyo Gubai responds by saying that she fell behind them, and then met this spider. Bai Jian, with the help of her talent, sees that all her classmates have escaped from the mutant spider, while she has lagged behind them. Inspired and thinking a little, Bai Jian reaches out to the girl and asks her to take him to the spider, which at first scares the girl, and then she is embarrassed. Kyo Gubai replies to the guy that it is dangerous there and that perhaps an evil fate awaits him there. Bai Jian grabs the girl's hand again and tells her that he is strong enough to protect them. He intends to show it to the girl. Bai Jian thinks that if she takes them to the spider, then he can not only use the mutant spider to train his fish, but also demonstrate his strength to the girl. Enthusiastically, he thinks that if she sees how Bai Jian defeats the mutant spider, she will definitely be impressed and immediately offer her loyalty to him. These are about the thoughts that come to Bai Jian's mind. He takes Kyo Gubai's hand again and tells her to calm down and show him the way. Looking at all this from afar, Bai Xiao is shocked that he immediately grabs the girl by the hand. And when she sees him smirk, she gets goosebumps. Kyo Gubai leads the guy to a cave, where the ancestress spider's lair is approximately located. A huge spider is sitting and a crowd of other, smaller spiders is gathering near her. Bai Jian and Kyo Gubai begin to look around. Once again, thanks to his ability, the young man sees all the talents of the mutant spider. Spider race, spider leader. Her kingdom, elementary bronze. Talent, a lava candle body. Spider qualification, advanced level gold. Skill, spider web production and cutting, group candle lighting. Seeing this from afar, Bai Jian thinks it strange that the probability of mutation of low-ranked spiritual beasts is extremely low. He wonders where the spider then got a double talent. Bai Jian thinks that if such a small beast has a double talent, then it means that something valuable is probably stored in this cave. After a little thought, he comes to the conclusion that treasures are stored here. The young man calls his fish out of space and tells her to prepare for battle. Seeing this, the timid Kyo Gubai again proclaims that he cannot cope with him. She asks the guy not to fool around and not to leave a safe place. The guy calmly replies to her that everything will be fine. He asks her to just step back and watch the process. On the sidelines, turning to the fish, he announces in a serious tone that they will first start with a water shot in order to reduce the number of ordinary and small spiders. He does this so that no one interferes with him during a fight with a huge mutant spider beast. He points his finger at the spider leader. After that, he asks the fish to wait until their leader is left alone, and then use the flow of water to instantly tear him apart. After he gives the fish detailed instructions, it immediately rushes to the spiders and immediately attacks small spiders. This is naturally noticed by their leader. She sees that the fish has only the 8th rank and wonders how she dared to invade her domain. Next, the leader asks the small fellow spiders to unite and eat this fish alive. Then all the spiders attack the fish at once, and then Bai-Jian announces the command for the fish. He tells her to direct the water to where there are most small spiders. The fish understands the owner and immediately does what she is told. Seeing that her brothers are being sawed by some small fish, the spider leader is shocked. She proclaims that the fish has not even reached iron. She becomes enraged and immediately asks the fish about how she dared to kill her subordinate right in front of her eyes. She threatens the fish with death. A huge mountain of spiders is immediately sent to her, and the leader himself also gets up from his seat. Then the fish is lost, but Bai-Jian brings her to her senses. He tells her to use the royal speed again. He listens to the owner and does everything exactly as he says. Royal speed can significantly increase the speed of the fish. Besides, it has achieved great success in controlling it. Therefore, if you use the royal speed, then it will be as easy for the fish to avoid their attacks as water splashes. At the speed of light, the fish one by one begins to pull all the small spiders to shreds, and finally gets to their leader. She begins to threaten the fish with death again with a ferocious look. The fish at this moment begins to get in the way and instead of attacking freezes in place. Seeing this, Bai-Jian shouts to the fish to ignore these provocations. Bai-Jian also asks the fish to clear the field before a real battle unfolds in this place. The fish immediately regains consciousness and starts killing small spiders again. Mutants. A fish in a competition with spiders kills almost all small spiders, which enraged their leader. She proclaims that the vile smelly fish has killed all her comrades. Bai-Jian sees that now their leader is furious enough to get up from his seat, fight with her fish. Then the leader gets up from his seat and directs a huge old fire web at the fish. This is molten silk, blue skill. A type of spider silk with a terrifyingly high temperature easily melts and cuts objects of various hardness. Seeing this, the fish hesitates again. This is noticed by Bai-Jian and again asks to hit the spider on the paw with a stream of water. Huge balls of water immediately fly at the mutant spider. The spider begins to defend itself with its claws, but the water flows almost pierce this shield. Looking at this, Bai-Jian notices that the force of water strokes is greater than before. The water system has a natural advantage over the water fish. Bai-Jian thinks that if they continue at the same pace, they will win without words. However, he comes to the conclusion that everything is going too smoothly. Suddenly, the fish is annealed by a web that has stuck to a high point of the cave. Looking closely at this, Bai-Jian notices that the cunning spider has made a trap with her fused web. Bai-Jian notices that the fish is gradually getting sick. He thinks that even if the fish can easily avoid the attacks of the spider click, but it becomes more and more with each attack. Over time, it will cover almost the entire spider nest, and the movements of the fish will be severely limited. Bai-Jian comes to the conclusion that this is just a trap to kill his fish faster. He immediately tells the fish to use the water to quickly corrode the web. He intends to end it faster. The fish immediately does what the owner tells it to do. With the help of her power, she creates huge waves, which one by one begin to eat the fallen web. Having gained the necessary momentum, the fish immediately directs the entire stream of water directly into the leader, the mutant spider, who remained the last spider in this cave. The mutant spider is immediately blown to shreds and nothing remains of it. As expected, they are victorious over the enemy. The fish immediately falls exhausted to the ground. Seeing this, Bai-Jian immediately picks her up. But suddenly, in his hands, she starts to light up, and they get promoted to the 9th rank. The promotion is successful, which makes Bai-Jian ecstatic. He comes to the conclusion that thanks to the experience gained, their goal was achieved. The fish still remains in a supine state. Then Bai-Jian praises the fish and tells her to rest, since this fight was not easy for her. Kyo-Gubai, who was watching all this, finally comes out of cover and asks if the fish Bai-Jian is okay. The young man, seeing her, is delighted and replies that everything is fine with his fish. He proclaims that if she rests, she will be as good as new. He calls the girl to look at their prey and walks towards the dead spider. As soon as he takes out a knife from his pocket and starts stabbing it into the monster, Kyo-Gubai immediately picks up the knife. With joy, she begins to open the monster's insides. It's worth noting that she had the highest score for anatomy at school, and that's why she behaves like this. The guy is of course shocked, but decides not to interfere with her pleasure. At this time, he thinks that perhaps the treasure that caused the spider to mutate must be in the cave. He decides to use the girl's talent to find him, but his thoughts are overtaken by Kyo-Gubai and then calls the guy. In her hand turns out to be some kind of shiny stone, which she stuck out of the inside of the mutant spider. She asks Bai-Jian to take a look at it. Blogger talent Bai-Jian immediately sees what it is, and this turns out to be the Awakening Stone, a divine stone containing the source of awakening. He also helps creatures awaken their talents. The young man realizes that even before he used the Eye of the Apocalypse, she had already discovered the main treasure of this cave. He comes to the conclusion that her talent will prove very useful in the treasure hunt. Bai-Jai and realizes that he has only seen two things that awaken talents before, and this, the Federation Stone and its space for the beast. With such thoughts, he looks closely at the stone he is holding in his hands. However, he decides not to talk about the value of the Kyogubai stone. Instead, he says he doesn't know what it is either, and puts the stone in his pocket. He tells her that when he gets home, then he will ask the adults. The girl agrees without any problems.